Well, hello once again. How's it going? Welcome to yet another crime dive. My name is Crystal Sky, and if you're anything like me, you find yourself drawn to true crime cases. So, like many others out there, I've decided to make videos about it. If you also are drawn to true crime and want to feel better about your own makeup skills, you should absolutely subscribe, and let's hang out together every other Tuesday, where I will take a deep dive look into a true crime case while slapping on the old clown paint. I almost said every Tuesday. So yeah, how's it going? How's the month treating you? I have been putting off today's case for quite some time because, yeah, I'm just going to warn you right off the bat. It is an intense case today. All the trigger warnings for today's case. Today, we will be talking about the awful, awful murder of Janet Chandler. This was actually a requested case, and it was requested by Harm Reduction Saves Lives. And when you actually threw this case my way, when you originally did, I did look up a quick synopsis of this case, and I was like, oh man, oh no, yeah, I can't do this one. It's way too intense. But you know, I feel like it is one of those things where it should be talked about because Janet was murdered simply for, being a woman and enjoying her sexuality. Now, there are some who dispute that particular fact. We'll, get all into it. But as we get into this case, you'll see why it's pretty important, I think, to talk about this case, because not only was it a terrible, terrible way for Janet to go. We will unfortunately get, all into it. But so many people witnessed this, guys. They witnessed Janet being killed. Again, we'll get all into it. And nobody did anything. It's abhorrent what Janet went through before being killed. And not just that, how many people were aware and how long they covered up this murder, guys. It's just... What can you really say about this case except for everyone involved in this case are just trash human beings, really. Just the definition of human garbage. And yeah, trigger warnings. So yeah, Janet was brutalized, like I said, in horrible, horrible ways. She had a train run on her, a gangbang, and we will be talking about that, so be forewarned. There is some intense topics that will be talked about. There will be intense language that will be used, cussing, misogynistic language, really awful stuff, and really awful facts about this case. So just really be forewarned. This is an intense one, and it may not be for you. But yeah, I think it should be a case that people are aware of, because I think it's just one of those things that needs to kind of be aware of, this is what people did to another human being. You know what I mean? So yeah, sorry if you seem a little sort of out of it. It's just, like I said, this case is really intense. It was a lot to research and get through, and I have been putting it off, not gonna lie, but I think it is a case that should be known about what happened and who did this to Janet. All right, so with all of that preamble, all of the trigger warnings, let's get into it. So Janet Marie Chandler was born on May 29th, 1956 in Muskegon Heights, Michigan. Her parents were Glenna and James Jim E. Chandler. She also had an older brother named James Chandler Jr. and a younger brother named Dennis, making Janet the middle child and the only girl. Dennis remembered how his sister, quote, she was always doing little projects to make Christmas special, and, quote, was an all-around good sister. Now, the Chandlers were a very, very conservative, very, very devout Christian family, and it is said that they, raised their children, of course, in their faith, and raised them pretty sheltered from a lot of things. Glenna said of her daughter, quote, she was easygoing and happy-go-lucky, and she lived a sheltered lifestyle. We are Christians, and she was brought up in the church, and all her friends were friends from church. In fact, it is said the Chandler children were not allowed to go over to, sleepovers or anything at friends' houses if that friend's parents dared drink alcohol. Yeah, that's how conservative and devout the Chandlers were with their religion and their lifestyle. Now, it is said due to her, sheltered, very religious upbringing, Janet was, pretty sensitive, maybe even naive a little bit, due to inexperience and all that and lack of, knowledge. And unsurprisingly, Janet, much like her parents, because that's what she was raised in, was also very devoutly religious, took her religion very seriously. Her journal that she kept, her little like diary/journal had a lot of religious musings in it. Like that's how, deeply devout and faithful Janet was to her religion. One of the last journal entries that she would ever write in it mused, quote, "When was Paul saved? When the Lord spoke him to go, or when he obeyed God and went?" Glennis said her daughter was, quote, "the most spiritual one in the family." When Janet was still fairly young, she had gone on evangelical missions and had sung in the church choir, was very musically active. We'll get into it. In middle school, Janet worked part-time at a daycare center, and at Fruitport High School, where she attended and graduated, Janet was described as pretty outgoing, even dating a bit, but of course never going like too far sexually or anything like that. In 1974, after high school, Janet attended the Muskegon County Community College, and here she would study music. Now, I read some reports that said initially Janet went to nursing school, but she wasn't really ready for the wild types of students that she ran into there. It was reported that, the kids were, partying, smoking weed, drinking, having sex, and, due to her sheltered upbringing, Janet was sort of like unprepared for that. So not sure about that. There was a couple reports that said that, but, at community college, she found pretty much the same, right? Just sort of like that normal experimental behavior that a lot of teenagers, many of them on their own for the first time in their life, indulge in, right? Now, it is said when she, went to Muskegon, she entered as a very like wide-eyed, very naive freshman. And she was completely unprepared for, parties, kids smoking weed, like I said, having sex and, drinking, all that stuff. She, had been raised very sheltered, so she was kind of like a culture shock, I guess you could say, right? Now, one of her professors there at community college did describe Janet as very talented. Janet had a beautiful voice. Like I said, we'll get into it, and said that she was very, very talented, but at the same time, she was also, quote, emotionally volatile. And it was said that she would run out of the classroom bursting in tears if she had received even like the slightest bit of like constructive criticism. So it seemed like, she was pretty sensitive. However, it is said it didn't take too long for Janet to start, maybe dipping her toe a little bit in that sort of stereotypical teenage experimentation that a lot of her peers were doing in college. Now, it said she started, maybe pushing the boundaries of her upbringing a little bit, and this was primarily fueled when Janet had her first sexual encounter at 17 years old. But unfortunately, that first sexual encounter was with some scumbag man who was more than twice her age and who seduced and groomed her. Yeah, that was her first real dip into like a sexual relationships in general, really. It was said Janet would sneak this man into her parents' home when they were away and her brothers were away, and they would have sex. And they did this like at least twice a week, I guess. Now, it is said that this action right here, or this whole experience, would have a ripple effect on Janet. And there are many who point to it as sort of being the beginning of sort of like her sexual awakening, if you will. And it is said that after this relationship, Janet did become sexually active. Now, there are, some in her family who deny this claim and say that she didn't really experiment with all of that. But there are others, including the investigators who investigated this, who say, after, unfortunately being groomed and seduced by this disgusting scumbag of a man, she would, sort of go on to kind of become, kind of sexually experimental and active, as many of her other peers were doing, right? Now, there was a childhood friend of Janet's who was aware of this relationship with this older man, and she said after this relationship, Janet's, quote, religious views changed because she realized, quote, if she sinned, she was not going to immediately go to hell. And I've definitely known a lot of people sort of, in the same situation where, they were raised in a very sheltered lifestyle, religious, non-religious, whatever, but just in like very sheltered, lifestyle. And once they get out there on their own for the first time and they kind of start seeing You know, kind of like how her friend alluded to that, like, oh, you mean if I have a beer, like, I won't go to hell? Or, oh, if I, like, have sex, the world's not gonna, you know, come to an end. It's not the worst thing ever. And they start, you know, pushing the boundaries a little bit, seeing, you know, well, what else? What else have I been misled about, you know? And I get it. It must be so hard not to raise your children, like, super sheltered from everything, right? Like, because you don't want any harm to come to them, you know? Again, that's why I can't be a parent, because I'd be, like, it would be so easy to just, like, I want to protect them from everything. In 1976, Janet then transferred to Hope College, which was a private Christian liberal arts school located in Holland, Michigan. And in her college application, Janet had written, quote, "My goals are first to acquire what God wants for me. His desire is for me to acquire my bachelor's degree in music vocal education, then my master's degree. I hope to teach in a private, probably Christian school, and to also work in theater and opera." Now, we briefly alluded to this earlier, but music was a very, very big deal in Janet's life. She was very passionate about music, and she had a really pretty voice to go along with her passion. She had been active in school musical productions, school musical groups, music at her church, and it is said that she boasted a rich mezzo-soprano voice. Now, her teachers at Hope College also described Janet as, you know, obviously very musically gifted with a beautiful voice, but they also kind of described her sort of the same as her teachers at Muskegon did, in that she was a little naive, a little emotionally sensitive. However, what's weird is that, you know, in high school, Janet was said to have been, you know, super popular and outgoing, but her teachers at Hope said that Janet did not have many friends there and actually struggled academically. Maybe she was having a hard time adjusting to maybe life at like a 4-year or something. I'm not sure. In August of 1978, as she's attending Hope College, Janet decided to get a job. She ended up getting a job as a motel clerk at the Blue Mill Inn. The Blue Mill Inn was located near US 31 and 16th Street, and here Janet worked the night shift. Now, the inn had pretty strict security measures in place for the night shift, and they were said to have the most strict, hardcore standards in the area, and this was due in part to the fact that the Blue Mill Inn, was one of the few places around that dealt with cash advance payments. And the inn could also be known to house some quote-unquote rough types. So the standard operating procedure was, starting at a certain time in the evening, the front door to the lobby and the hotel clerk, the front desk where Janet worked, would be locked. And the desk clerk would be able to unlock the door via a buzzer at their desk, so they could operate business that way if they wanted to let someone in. But most of the transactions would be done through a teller window, kind of like those old drive-up bank windows. You remember those? Am I outing how old I am here? Where you go and put your thing in, and sometimes there's a little tube that it goes down, and the little clerk is, at their desk doing their thing. And that was how business was primarily conducted after the doors were locked at a certain time at night. And then at a certain time in the morning, probably when morning shift got there or something, the doors would be unlocked and it'd be open for business as usual. But yeah, so pretty strict security measures. Now, it was said Janet's parents were not exactly thrilled with their daughter's new job. I can't say that I would be a fan either, especially if this is the kind of hotel and place that sort of, houses rough types. It had that kind of reputation. And she's working the night shift. Come on, I wouldn't be exactly thrilled either. Quote, "We tried to get her not to take that. Even then, a night clerk job at a motel wasn't the safest place to be." And this was according to her father, Jim. He'd actually visited his daughter once at work, and he was very alarmed at the type of seedy people that were sort of hanging around and were patrons of the hotel. Quote, "I wish that I'd questioned it more. There were things I should have done." Now, Dennis, Janet's younger brother, seemed to notice a shift in his sister's behavior after she started working at the inn. That's when he started noticing a slight change. And he figured she had, quote, "probably experimented with things adults do. Maybe a little bit of drink, different dating." Now, Janet did not live at home anymore at this time. Janet was, about 21 at this point. point in time, and she actually lived in her own apartment off campus. And she lived there with her roommate and friend, her boss at the inn actually, 21-year-old Lori Ann Swank. And it is said the two women were very, very close. Janet considered Lori like her best friend. They were said to be attached at the hip, always going places together, confiding in each other. They were, roommates. So yeah, they spent a lot of time together. And it is said they were supposed to have this super, close friendship. Now at this point in time, things are going pretty well for Janet. She was only 13 credit hours short of graduating, so she almost had her bachelor's. She was slated to graduate in May of 1979, and she had planned to teach music once she had her degree. And for the winter semester of 1978/1979, Janet had enrolled in 8 credit hours, while also taking private voice lessons and balancing her job at the inn. So at this same time, around the same time where Janet is enrolled in her winter semester, getting ready to graduate the upcoming spring and all that stuff and working at the inn, the city of Holland, remember where Hope College was located and where Janet lived, was embroiled in some controversy. So a company called Chemtron Pigments Corporation, it was a paint company, owned and operated a paint plant in the city. But at this time, over 200 workers and union members were going on strike. They had walked out, and the Teamsters had even hired professional strikers out of Detroit to come and build up the ranks on the picket line. And in return, Chemtron hired private security guards to, make sure their plant still operated, make sure that the scabs could still cross the picket line and do their jobs. So they hired private security to sort of work the picket line and keep their plant in operation. They used the company Wackenhut, and the company ended up bringing in guards from all across the country to work the picket line and protect the scabs and the company. Now, it said, of course, there was a lot of tension between the strikers and the guards. Duh. Things were escalating as the days grew. The guards would throw out what are those called? Like the spike strips to puncture tires, while the strikers would taunt the guards and throw insults at them. And it was getting really bad. Tension was building as the days were growing. Now, a majority of the guards that Wackenhut had brought into Holland ended up staying at the Blue Mill Inn, where Janet worked. About 80 security personnel would be staying there. And some of those guards that stayed at the Blue Mill Inn included James Cleophas Bubba Nelson, Freddie Bass Parker, Robert Michael Lynch, who was a little bit older than the guards. He was 39. The rest of the guards were in their mid to late 20s. Arthur Carlton Carl Paiva, and Anthony Tony Eugene Williams. So James Nelson went by Bubba, so that's what I'm going to refer to him. And Arthur Paiva went by Carl, so that's what I'll be calling him. And Anthony Williams went by Tony, so that's what will be calling him. And these gentlemen were just some of the guards that were stationed at the Blue Mill Inn during this time of the strike and during the time Janet worked there. Now, it is said the security personnel were, kind of rough and tumble types, the types to love to party and kind of get a little rowdy. Though it is said Robert Lynch, who was a little bit older than the other guards, wasn't really part of the inner circle of guards. He had married his wife, Melanie Sue Smith, in 1962, and he didn't even work on the picket line like a lot of the guards. He worked inside the plant, handing out per diem checks. And he did other clerical work and that kind of stuff. So Robert, even though he did party with the other guards and did kind of get rowdy with them, it was said he wasn't really sort of like part of that inner circle, He was older than most of them, had married and stuff. I believe already had kids. I can't remember if he had kids already at this point, but he was just kind of, at a different point in his life than the rest of the guards. But that didn't stop him from, partying and hanging out with his coworkers. Now, it was said there was also a bar next door to the Blue Mill Inn called the Tap Room, and that it was sort of the primary hangout for all of the guards. It was said that, you could drink, maybe, smoke a little weed. I don't know if there was anything harder drug-wise going on, maybe some coke or something, not sure. But yeah, it was said that you could, at least smoke weed there. It was rumored there were sex workers that operated out of there. And so yeah, the guards were kind of attracted attracted to this bar. But it wasn't just, supposed sex workers that were engaging in sexual relations with the Wackenhut guards. Many of the women who worked at the inn, including Lori and Janet, also had numerous sexual encounters with the different guards. Janet had even had a few sexual encounters with the head guard, which was Carl. And apparently one time, Lori had found out that Janet had had sex with another guard in one of the display suites at work, I think on the clock, and she had to reprimand her. And it said that was the culture at the Blue Mill Inn. Like, yeah, everyone was just having a good time, sleeping with everyone else, including Lori and Janet. Now, like I said, there are many of Janet's family who don't believe that Janet was engaging in sexual activities at the inn and wasn't having all this sex. There's other people, including investigators and people who worked at the hotel, who said, yeah, Janet was, having a good time like we all were. However, there was one time, right? So one time, though, things got a little messy at work. So while Janet was, working her usual shift at the front desk, a 21-year-old maid who worked at the inn named Cheryl Ruiz stormed into the front desk and started yelling at Janet, full-on screaming and yelling at Janet. She was accusing Janet of sleeping with her boyfriend, Tony, who, if you remember, is one of the other security guards. And Cheryl, like many people who get cheated on for some reason, blamed the whole thing on Janet. And it's hey, Cheryl, you ever stop to think maybe you should go be talking to your boyfriend about this? I don't know why people always do this. They blame the wrong party. Janet's not the one in a relationship with you, Cheryl. Your boyfriend Tony is, so why don't you go off on him? But yeah, she blamed Janet for the whole thing and ended up having a full-on screaming match with Janet in the front desk / lobby area. And as they were screaming and yelling at each other, it came out this incident where Janet supposedly slept with Tony. Apparently, one night during her shift, Janet had called up Tony's room and told him to come down right away. There was an emergency. And when he got there, it is said that he found Janet completely naked, wearing nothing but cowboy boots, and they went into one of the spare rooms and had sex. And that was the incident that Cheryl was accusing Janet of. And this fight was very, very loud. There are many who were staying at the inn who recalled hearing it, including another Blue Mill Inn employee, 20-year-old Diane Griffin Marsman. She had actually dropped Cheryl off to confront Janet because she was a friend of Cheryl's. Diane and Cheryl were really good friends, and Diane was even dating a security guard as well, Freddie Parker. And Diane would later say, though she didn't witness the altercation, because she wasn't actually physically there, she certainly heard it because she was waiting for Cheryl outside. And of course, what do you think? It didn't take long at all for this whole gossip to spread about oh, did you hear Cheryl going off on Janet? And everyone was talking about it. And of course, it also was discovered why Cheryl was yelling at Janet. And it was that Janet had slept with Tony and that was waiting for him, all naked and stuff. So the story spread like wildfire. Now, Carl heard of this fight and he was pissed, all right? So get this. Carl was angry that Janet was apparently not only sleeping with him, even though Carl himself was engaged in multiple relationships, including with a woman named Patty Bright. She would later be known as Patty Bright Ward, but she was just described as a striker, so, I'm gonna guess she was one of the workers on strike, but he also had a relationship going with her, and according to multiple sources, had multiple relationships, casual relationships going on with all kinds of women. But this pig got offended that Janet was having other relationships. Of course, right? Of course. That age-old misogyny. It's okay for a man to sleep around and, to get laid as much as possible, but if a woman dares, sleep around, if a woman dares enjoy sex or anything like that, oh, well, obviously she's a slut and a whore and all that, right? That was the attitude that Carl had, that he thought Janet was a slut. And he was even more angered when Lori confided in him just how many sexual trysts her roommate had with guards under his command. Yeah, Janet's supposed best friend and roommate, Lori, told Carl, oh yeah, you're pissed at that? Well, you should hear about all these other sexual conquests that she's had, and just told him about all these men Janet was, allegedly sleeping with. Now, it is said It is said the reason Lori did this is because she was actually jealous of Janet. She was jealous that all the guards wanted Janet. Everyone talked about how beautiful she was and wanted her and, how much she was sleeping around. And Lori, she was jealous. She was jealous of that. She also had a crush on Carl and was mad that Janet was sleeping with him and that he apparently liked her. Yeah, because Lori was so insecure and was so jealous of everyone digging her roommate, she decided to get back at Janet and tell Carl about just how much Janet was sleeping around. She, I guess, was hoping Carl would think less of her and then, want to date her or something. I don't know. I'll never understand people like this, but especially women like this who it's like, all right, you have a crush on this guy who's openly having relationships with all these women and you want to get with that and you're jealous your roommate has banged him a couple times? I don't know. Make it make sense, Make it make sense. I also wish I could say that I'm shocked and surprised at this behavior of Lori as well, right? But it's not. This is so typical high school mean girl behavior. And what was Carl's reaction after Lori confided in him all of Janet's sexual conquests? He said, quote, "That slut." He was angry. How dare Janet have other relationships outside of him? That's right, because women are only there to be subservient to men, right, Carl? Janet is just there to be subservient to you, right? She's not a person. She's not a human being with her own thoughts and feelings and own complex emotions. No. She's just there to serve you, right? Guarantee you this is what this pig thought. And it is said that it did not take long for everyone to sort of gang up on Janet. We're not talking about just the guards here. Fellow employees too, fellow women. It didn't take long for, the whisperings to be about, oh yeah, Janet, she's such a whore, right? Oh, she's such a slut, I hate her. That started happening, And if you're a woman, you're not shocked, right? This is exactly how high school mean girl bullying goes. And it is said, everyone thought Janet was just a slut and slept around and thought too much of herself they thought she was thought of herself as high and mighty because she slept around, because she's confident with her body and comfortable with it and was experimenting or doing whatever. Everything else that you all are doing as well. Like I said, man, make it make sense. None of this makes sense, but this is what happened, and it didn't take long for, Janet to be the one that everyone hated and talked shit about. And of course, the guards joined in on this. Apparently, some of these guards included guards that Janet had supposedly had sexual relationships with, but then, I don't know, I guess she dumped them or something. I don't know, man. It's all so silly to me. What? I don't understand why any of these people are resentful to Janet when, she's participating in the same thing that you all are. Everyone was sleeping with each other. It was, this whole casual thing. That's how, the culture around the Blue Mill Inn and the Wackenhut guards was described as. So it just blows my mind, and it boggles my mind that Janet's getting called out for something that everyone else is participating in. But that's usually how this type of mean girl crap goes, right? Singling someone out for something that everyone else is doing. And eventually, it didn't take too long for this sort of mean girl type of thing, bullying and gossiping to escalate. And soon there was a group of people that included Carl and Lori, among others, to sort of hatch a plan to kind of take Janet down a peg or two, as it were. Kind of put her in her place, teach her a lesson, They were talking shit about her, talking shit and smack, and, just kind of going in their own echo chamber, talking about what a horrible person Janet was. And it didn't take long for, the conversations to veer towards, well, maybe we should do something about Janet. And that's exactly what happened. There were talks about, we need to get back at her and take her out and take her down and stuff. So a plan started being formed and discussed with multiple people involved, y'all. We'll, keep saying, we will get into it. Now, Carl told Lori that she didn't have to worry about her slutty roommate anymore. He had a plan that he hatched that was going to deal with Janet. teach her a lesson. He told Lori that he was going to arrange a surprise party for Janet. And at this party, numerous guards would be present. He said they were going to teach her a lesson about acting like a whore by passing Janet amongst themselves. Yeah, they were gonna run a train on her. They were gonna gangbang her. That is what Carl and a bunch of guards and co-workers, supposed friends of Janet, came up with. I don't even know what to say. I really don't. Like, I'm reading this, I'm researching this case, and I'm like, they think she's a whore and, like, sleeping around and you know, all this other stuff. And so they're going to punish her by sexually assaulting her. Like, using sex as a weapon. Because God forbid a woman enjoy sex or any of that, right? Like, it's just, I just can't help but think like that because, like, there's no logic. Like, I guess that's the problem is I'm trying to put logic on illogical people. But, like, yeah, where's the thought process? I don't understand this resentment and rage towards Janet. I don't get it. I don't get how you even come up with this disgusting just torture. Like, it's, keep it real, like it's torture. Like, how does your sick, demented, depraved, twisted pea brain come up with something like this? Why would that even enter your mind? You know, like, I don't know. But yeah, this is the plan that these people came up with. I mean, what do you say to that? Like, I can tell you right now, like, because I know we all like to say, like, oh, I would do this or that. Like, you don't really know unless you're in that situation. But I can tell you right now, like, I know if I heard people seriously, legitimately discussing this surprise party, I would have informed someone. And yeah, maybe the authorities wouldn't take you seriously. Maybe they wouldn't, but maybe they would at least come sniffing around and it would at least scare these idiots off from doing something like this, you know? I don't understand how you know about something like this and you do nothing. There's multiple people who are aware of this plan, guys. Multiple people, including Janet's supposed best friend. So let's continue. So on January 31st, 1979 is when the plan would go down, right? The party was going to happen. So Janet came in on January 30th, a little bit before midnight, as per usual, to get ready for her shift. Remember, she worked the night shift, so she worked overnight. Now, as Janet was, down in the lobby working her shift, Robert was up in his own room. He had actually gotten back earlier that evening from burying his father. His father had died, and he had spent some time with him on his deathbed before he died. It was shortly before 2 a.m., so technically January 31st, 1979, when another one of the guards phoned Robert up in his room. The guard told Robert that they needed a way to lure Janet away from the front desk, and, could he help with that? Now, I'm not sure if the guard on the phone who called Robert was Bubba. I think it was, but I'm not 100% clear on that. But either way, the guard told Robert that the plan was to take Janet from work and drive her to Carl's house, which was not too far away. He did not stay at the Blue Mill Inn. He actually had his own, it was described as a sort of guest house. It was located next to the Chemtron plant. It was also near/in front Lake Macatawa. I hope that's how you say that. And yeah, it was like right next to the plant, like either right next to it or like across the street from it or something. So it was like right there. And that's where Carl lived. And it was described as like a multi-level like cottage/guest house. So that was what this guard, I think it may have been Bubba, told Robert's like, hey, we got to get Janet out of the front desk, and we got to take her from the Blue Mill Inn to Carl's house. And Robert agreed to help, and so that's why I said I wasn't sure if Bubba was on the phone with Robert and telling him, but, we do know it was Robert and Bubba who ended up coming downstairs to the front desk where Janet was working. So when they entered, Bubba told Janet that there was a surprise party for her, and Robert said Janet then allowed him to wrap gauze around her eyes, and Bubba secured it with duct tape. And with her blindfolded, Bubba then led Janet outside to a waiting vehicle. Now, Robert did not follow. This was around 2 a.m., all right? It's a little after 2 a.m. Robert just got back from burying his father. He also had to work his shift at 6 a.m., so in a few hours. So he did not follow Bubba and Janet. He just went back upstairs and went to sleep until he had to wake up for his shift. But But before he did that, he decided to cover their tracks, all right? Because the front desk clerk is missing. Someone's going to notice that. So Bubba had taken some money from the safe before leaving with Janet. So Robert called the cops to report a robbery, saying that his buddy had been on the phone with Janet when his buddy heard Janet say, quote, "Don't take it all, sir," before the line went dead. That's what Robert called police and told him, like, "Hey, my friend was talking, to the front desk clerk, and all of a sudden she said, 'Don't take it all, sir,' and then the line went dead, and oh, she's missing and there's money missing." So he was starting the cover story. So when police arrived at the Blue Mill Inn, Holland Police Detective Jim Fairbanks was the first on scene. Quote, "It had been a robbery. We could determine that. And it was also very clear that the clerk was missing." The clerk, of course, being Janet. They noticed the money missing from the safe/cash drawer. It was about $500. The safe's door was open. There were empty money bags lying around. The phone was off the hook, and there were no clear signs of a struggle. Janet's coat, purse, and a crushed cigarette was still in the front office. Her car was still parked at the inn, and there were tire tracks found in the snow right outside the main lobby. Fairbanks, along with hotel officials, were also really baffled why the front lobby's door was wide open. Remember, we went over the security measures that the Blue Mill Inn had enlisted, and they were all scratching their head like, well, this is weird because the door should have been locked from the get-go, and the mechanism worked and all that, so that really baffled authorities. Fairbanks talked to Robert, of course, who had called it in, and Robert said he didn't know nothing, didn't remember nothing, didn't see nothing. And after he was done talking to Detective Fairbanks, Robert then went up to his room to catch a few hours before his shift at 6 a.m. Fairbanks, meanwhile, continued interviewing employees and guests, seeing if anyone had heard anything, seen anything, did anyone know anything. Some witnesses claimed to have seen a Jeep type / four-wheel type of vehicle parked near the hotel's entrance earlier that evening. But even though the inn was full of guests, full of employees, Fairbanks couldn't get anyone to describe what happened to Janet. No one saw it. Police immediately set up roadblocks, and the Holland police told reporters that they were currently looking for a lone bandit driving a white and green Jimmy four-wheel vehicle, my goodness, that had been reported stolen on January 30th in St. Joseph, 50 miles away. They believed that this green and white Jimmy may have been the vehicle that made the tire tracks in the hotel's parking lot. And they figured if that was the case, this vehicle may have been used to abduct Janet. Along with the vehicle, they also described Janet, of course, who was actively, missing, and they described what she was last seen wearing. Glasses, black slacks, a gray blouse, a gold watch, and a pearl ring. And as Janet had disappeared, presumably kidnapped, her family came to Holland and searched all that Wednesday for any sign of Janet. Dennis said, quote, "I just got in my Jeep and drove to Holland and started driving all the back roads. My dad did the same thing, and they spent all day on Wednesday looking for any sign of Janet." Meanwhile, Robert had slept until 6 a.m. and worked his shift, his 12-hour shift, so he worked from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And after he was off work, he decided he was going to go to Carl's and see how the party had shaken out. Just beware, we're going to be getting into some graphic detail, and there will be more graphic detail even later, so prepare yourselves. So when he first arrived, he saw Janet sitting naked on a cushion in the corner. Duct tape was over her mouth, and her hands were bound in front of her. One of the guards, there were a lot of people still there, a lot of security guards, and one of those guards was dancing around in his underwear. And a few other men and women were just kind of milling around and kind of talking, They were drinking and, just acting like having a bound naked woman in the corner was no biggie. Robert would later say that he had no idea what had happened before he got there. And we still don't 100% clearly know what happened, but we know some details. And so we're gonna get into that. So after she was driven to Carl's house, Janet was led inside, where a group of at least 10 men, at least, possibly more, but at least 10 men, all security guards, including Carl and Bubba, of course, but also Freddie and Tony, and about 5 women, including Lori, Cheryl, and Diane, were all waiting for Janet at Carl's home. There was approximately anywhere from 15 to 20 people at this party, guys. So when the door closed and locked behind Janet, some at the party, that included the 4 men that I specifically named, immediately stripped, handcuffed, and gagged Janet, and for the next 7 16 hours, Janet would experience the most humiliating, degrading, awful torture that I can imagine. She was paraded around the house, bound and nude, as everyone jeered at her and made fun of her, telling her how much of a whore she was, how big of a slut, how she deserved what was going to happen to her and what was happening to her, that she'd be put in her place, and just on and on and on. And you know who was among this crowd of jeers? Jeering at Janet and telling her all these awful things? Her supposed best friend Lori. She was one of the ones egging everything on. They poured hot wax on Janet's back, poured alcohol down her throat, all while jeering at her, telling her how awful she was and how she deserved everything she was getting. They had done this for hours on end by the time Robert had come around. Robert would later say he thought Janet was on some kind of drug or something because her eyes were like really glazed over and kind of had like a lost look to them. But in actuality, it's more likely that she was just in a severe state of shock after everything. Robert said he pounded a few beers after he got there, and at some point, he said someone placed a belt around Janet's neck. And it was tied in such a way that if, like, you pulled it, her head would kind of, like, go back. Sort of like in a crude leash of sorts. And then those at the party then started dragging, Janet around the room, forcefully tugging on the belt, causing her throat to constrict and her head to snap up. And it was said that this device was used to sort of control and punish Janet if she tried to get away. And then, when they all got bored of that, a string of guards, including Robert, then led Janet into a bedroom. They tied her down to the bed as she was blindfolded with duct tape around her mouth and her eyes. Robert would later said that the mood at this point grew pretty dark. Like, the party already was pretty dark, if you couldn't tell, but he said the mood grew especially dark once everyone was in this bedroom and they had Janet tied down. And after they had Janet tied down, at least 6 guards, all took turns sexually assaulting Janet. They assaulted her anally and vaginally as they beat her, pulled her hair, and yanked on the belt that was still around her neck. And as Janet was being assaulted, like actively assaulted, guys, there was a crowd watching. And as this was actively happening right before their eyes, all right, this poor woman being brutalized, the crowd was jeering at her and cheering on the assaulters, saying that they were going too easy on her, that they should, quote, fuck her to death. They called Janet bitch and slut and whore multiple times, including Lori, who simply looked at her supposed best friend and called her, quote, you bitch, saying that she deserved everything happening to her right now. As she's being assaulted, are you comprehending the what I'm telling you? Are you getting it? Yeah. A crowd of people watching this happening and cheering it on. I have no words. I really don't. Like, I cannot convey how disgusted and sickened I was when I read this, and how every single person in that room and at that party is a piece of human garbage. So as of all of this was going on, the jeering, the active assault or whatever, Carl arranged to have photos be taken as this party was ongoing, as Janet was actively being assaulted. Carl arranged it so someone took photos. It is said Carl wanted blackmail at every single person that was at that party. And it is said, yeah, he took photos of the sexual assaults as they were actively happening. And then finally, it was Robert's turn. He got up on Janet, pinning his knees to her shoulders, using his feet to stop her from, like, wiggling around. He slapped her, whispered something in her ear, bit her neck hard, and punched her again. And then he began violently sexually assaulting Janet. And as he was violently assaulting her, he tightened the belt as others had done before him. Only Robert kept tightening the belt. And he tightened it tighter and tighter and tighter. As he was violently assaulting her, he didn't let up, and as he actively was sexually assaulting Janet, he pulled the belt too tight until Janet was finally strangled to death. That is how Janet died. Like, let that sink in. That's that's got to be one of, if not the worst way for someone to die that I've covered on this channel. It's just so actively brutal. Like, every disgusting, horrifying, brutalizing thing you can think of, Janet suffered it. Now, when the party realized that Janet was dead, full-blown panic and chaos broke out. It is said Carl threw a chair against the wall and yelled, quote, "This party is fucking over." Everyone then scrambled to clean up the crime scene, dispose of any evidence, cover their tracks. Carl informed everyone at the party of the photos, that he had them, and he told everyone, "You talk, we all go down." Robert then drove Janet's body 30 miles away near Covert Township, which was about 4 miles from South Haven. He drove to a wooded area of Interstate 196, pulled off into an emergency turnaround drive. It connected the northbound and southbound lanes. This was near the Covert Township exit, and Robert haphazardly tossed Janet's nude dead body into a snow embankment and haphazardly covered her with snow, and then just left her there. Janet's body was discovered at 1:30 a.m. on Thursday morning, February 1st, 1979, where Robert had left her in the snowbank, naked, battered, and degraded. A state highway department snowplow driver was the one who discovered her. He was on highway maintenance duty, and he noticed that the snow had been disturbed on that emergency turnaround off of Interstate 196. So he had pulled over to, check it out. He got out of his snowplow with a flashlight, climbed the snowbank, and saw a strange form in the snow. It was Janet's arm poking out of the snowbank at an odd angle. Another article said that part of her torso was also exposed. And of course, after seeing that, he immediately notified authorities. Now, when her story was first reported, it was believed Janet had been robbed while at work on January 31st at around 2:10 a.m. and was kidnapped. Associated Press reported that Janet had been on the phone when she had been abducted and robbed. They said she was on the phone with one of the motel's patrons, a Wackenhut security guard, Jim Nelson, that's Bubba, who was reported to have told police that he was on the phone with Janet when he heard her say "just a minute" as someone entered the lobby. He said he then heard her tell someone with a deep male voice not to take all the money. Bubba said the line then went dead, and that he tried to call the front desk back from another guard's room, but when he couldn't get through, that's when he called authorities. Yeah, that's what this article from Associated Press stated, which I thought was interesting. Robert wasn't mentioned anywhere. It was all Bubba. Police said they believed that Janet had died late that Wednesday evening / early that Thursday morning, and this was due to the snowfall. There was about 4 or 5 inches of snow in the area Janet was found, but she was only lightly dusted with snow, making them, believe that she had not been there, all night as the snow had fallen. There were also dragging marks in the area, showing that her body was clearly dragged to that area, along with tire tracks. Although police did not tell the public if those tracks matched the same tracks that they found at the Blue Mill Inn. And that was how Janet's story was first reported on, when the news of her body being found was first reported and discovered. A Michigan State Police helicopter was used to try and track that green and white Jimmy 4-wheel vehicle that the police were looking for, as well as search the area that Janet had been found in. The Holland Police Department was assisted by the FBI and the Ottawa County Sheriff's Office. They also brought in search dogs to comb the area where Janet had been found. They were hoping to find some pieces of her clothing. They found no articles of her clothing anywhere. And after a day-long search with the dogs and helicopter, nothing would be found. The police roadblocks that they had set up after the robbery had been lifted at dawn, and police told reporters that they believed the Jimmy suspect had somehow gotten past them. Oh, and I just thought this was an interesting aside. So, as Janet's story is being reported on, the papers stated that the motel employees described Janet as a, quote, friendly person and conscientious worker, and Holland Police Deputy Chief Gene Gebb said, quote, the motel employees are really in shock. It's just one big happy family there. I thought that was very interesting when I saw the original news articles reporting on this story. Yeah, one big happy family. The autopsy was performed that same day by Van Buren County Medical Examiner, Dr. John Kleber, and he, found that Janet had been sexually assaulted anally and vaginally, and that her cause of death was strangulation by a man's belt. I'm guessing maybe because of like the size of the bruising or something, but yeah, he specifically said a man's belt. There was also severe bruising on her wrists, indicating that she had been bound for quite some time. They also found traces of the adhesive that duct tape has and leaves behind all over Janet's face. And it was also all over her hands and feet, which, told them she'd been bound with duct tape, all over. Dr. Kleber was also able to determine that Janet had been killed approximately 6 hours before she had been discovered. And he actually suspected that she was dumped there not long after she died at all, because I guess some of the snow that was under her body had actually melted from the warmth that her body still radiated, which I thought that was interesting. I wonder how long a body stays warm after it's dead. However, a Kalamazoo pathologist named Daniel Glaser, or maybe it's Glasser, reported that the autopsy results were inconclusive as to Janet's cause of death. Van Buren County Prosecutor Ward Hamlin said although an autopsy had been performed, they were still waiting on more test results to come in before they officially ruled her cause of death as strangulation. It seems that police were keeping pretty quiet initially on the autopsy results, and they did not publicly disclose a whole lot of what they had found. And I guess the case, at least speaking from jurisdiction-wise, was already pretty tricky because Janet's body had been found in Van Buren County, but the abduction had occurred in Ottawa County. But Dr. Kleber stood by his cause of death. Quote, "The cause of death was strangulation. I don't think there was any doubt." And Jim would officially identify his daughter's body later that same day she had been found. By the next day, Friday, February 2nd, a multi-agency manhunt was underway, and the police were now reporting that the man who abducted Janet could have possibly be the same man who had attempted to abduct a woman earlier that evening. This man had attempted to abduct a 20-year-old sales clerk who worked at a liquor store that same evening that Janet was taken. She was locking the doors, and the man had come up and tried to force her in his car, but she managed to get away. And this had happened only 3 miles away from the inn. And it had happened about 40 minutes before Janet would be abducted at around 1:20 a.m. or so. The sales clerk was able to give a description of the man. He was described as 18 or 19 years old, about 5'8", with long, stringy brown hair, wearing a black ski-type jacket, blue jeans, and a composite sketch was compiled based on her eyewitness account. The police also reported this man was driving a 1971/1972 brown two-door sedan, and State Police Detective Sergeant John Carson of the State Police Post located in South Haven said though they were still looking for that green and white Jimmy, they had not ruled out other vehicles being used by the perpetrator. He again stated that there were tire tracks found at the scene where Janet was found, but declined to say if those tire tracks matched the green and white Jimmy that they were looking for. Police issued public pleas for anyone with any information to come forward, and they ended up expanding their theories on the types of vehicles that may have been used to kidnap Janet. Detective Sergeant Carson appealed to the public again, asking that truckers or other motorists who might have seen that vehicle parked in that emergency turnaround off the Interstate 196 where Janet was found to come forward if they had seen anything and if they were traveling there between 9 p.m. that Wednesday night and 1:30 a.m. the next Thursday morning. They also re-released the description of Janet's clothes that she was last seen wearing, telling people to please come forward if they found them. Meanwhile, Holland Police and Ottawa County authorities worked on the circumstances of the actual robbery, while state police from several posts were pursuing the murder investigation. Quote, "We are questioning just about everybody, but we have no positive suspects," and this is according to Holland Police Chief Charles Lindstrom. He also stated that he believed there was, quote, "only a remote possibility that vehicle is linked with the crime," in reference to the green and white Jimmy. An Ottawa County Sheriff's Department spokeswoman, meanwhile, declared that they believed the liquor store attack on the female sales clerk and Janet's attack were not related. And she did confirm that 2 sets of tire tracks were found at the inn and where Janet's body was found, but declined to say if they were made by the same vehicle. But she did say they believed that Janet had been dumped there and that nothing had occurred where she was found. Quote, "There was no signs of anything having happened there except for the body being placed. Nothing occurred at the scene. Police, of course, tried to interview each and every guard and employee of the Blue Mill Inn, including Patty Bright, Bright, remember she would later be known as Patty Bright Ward, who actually alibied Carl. And she told police that her and Carl had been out of town the night Janet was murdered. So that same Friday, February 2nd, a special task force made up of Western Michigan law enforcement was created in order to pursue Janet's case. Director of Communications at the Holland Police Department, who were coordinating the task force, Sergeant Keith Howding, said, quote, "We've got every available officer working on the case," and said dozens of detectives and uniformed officers from city departments, county departments, and even the state police had all been called in to work on the murder investigation. The next day, Holland's Silent Observer Witness Program put out an ad offering $1,000 reward money for any information that led to a resolution in Janet's case. And a memorial service was held for Janet at Hope College on Sunday, February 4th. And her funeral was held the next day at the Calvary Baptist Church in Muskegon with, get this, reports stating that Lori, Carl, and Bubba attended. Now, almost every report said Lori attended, so I'm pretty sure that she attended 100%. But there were, some reports stated that Carl and Bubba also attended. A recording of Janet singing My Jesus was played at her funeral, and this would actually be the last time that Janet's parents would listen to any recordings of their daughter singing. They said it was just too painful after that. It's just so sad. As the 1 week mark passed on Janet's case, law enforcement was still baffled. On top of that, they had little to no leads to go on. The same day as Janet's funeral, Monday, February 5th, police were now theorizing that maybe robbery wasn't the main motive in this crime because they were baffled. They didn't know really what the real motive even was. And, this is when they sort of put that out in the public, we think Janet may have been targeted. We don't think robbery was the primary motive here. Now, this theory was apparently mainly fueled by the fact that Janet's abduction and murder was the second one in the area within 5 months. 13-year-old Tammy Lynn Pirro of Conklin had been kidnapped and murdered in August of 1978, and there were many in the local area that got on edge after, Janet's abduction and murder. Howding did say that though the theory that Janet may have been, specifically targeted was, being looked at as a theory, he said that was just one of many theories they were looking at in the case. Quote, "We have received many tips, but it's too early to tell if any will pay off." State Police Sergeant Melvin Coanes added, quote, "It may be a long investigation, but we have hopes of things developing." By Tuesday, February 6th, the pathologist's report concluded that yes, Janet did die of strangulation, and police came out officially ruling out the green and white Jimmy. However, Detective Sergeant Carson said that they did not rule out another type of four-wheel vehicle being used, but he didn't elaborate further. Sergeant Howding said, quote, "The tire tracks didn't match, but we do feel a four-wheel drive vehicle was used. One was seen leaving the area about the time of the abduction." So that green and white Jimmy was eventually found, and it turns out it belonged to Hubert Haynes and his wife. Remember, they lived in St. Joseph, and that Jimmy of theirs had been stolen by their 18-year-old grandson, Scott Hill, and his girlfriend, 19-year-old Beth Hansen. It was just a coincidence that Scott managed to steal the vehicle during a potential time frame of when Janet was abducted. But, when they found it, police did thoroughly, search the Jimmy just to make sure it hadn't been used. And yeah, they officially ruled out the Jimmy as being related or tied to Janet's abduction or murder at all. It was just Scott here and his girlfriend looking for a joyride. The police also came out and said that the Jimmy's tire tracks didn't match the tire tracks at either scene. Howding also stated to the press that they were asking any women who had maybe escaped an attempted abduction in the local area to come forward if they had not done so already. And the reward for any information leading to an arrest in Janet's case is increased to $1,500 after a $500 donation by the officials of the Holland Independent Insurance Association. But over a month later, by March 9th, police were drying up on leads. Chief Gibb said that the number of leads and clues coming in about the case had drastically fallen as the weeks had passed by. And at that point, only 4 detectives were now working the case full-time, and 2 additional detectives from the South Haven State Police Post were working the case part-time. And even though the investigation had produced over 1,000 pages of notes, there was nothing fresh or solid to go on. This was also the day where the reward money for any information in Janet's case jumped to $3,000, and this was after an anonymous donation of $1,000. I do not know where the additional $500 came from. On Wednesday, March 21st, police released a sketch of an unidentified bearded man who was seen in the area of the Blue Mill Inn like 30 minutes before Janet disappeared. Police went out of their way to emphasize, however, that this man was strictly just wanted for questioning. They thought maybe he had seen something. He wasn't a person of interest or suspect. Gibb reiterated what he had earlier that month, that leads had dried up. He stated the police had tracked down 265 tips, but none of them had led to anything of substance. The $3,000 reward was emphasized and placed in local papers and ads for several months. And after 5 months passed, police still had nothing to go on. They stated that the only thing that they knew for sure that night was that Janet had forgotten to lock the front door, and that was how the perpetrator had gained entry. Detective Sergeant Fairbanks said, quote, "The killer walked through an open door, and the only explanation we have is that she forgot to lock it." Several motel patrons had informed the police that they had seen the front lobby's door open about 30 minutes before Janet would be abducted, and that was it. All right, after almost 6 months, it's like 5 months after she was discovered, that was all police knew for sure. And as we know, that wasn't even correct. And after this, leads and stories on Janet's case would dry up, and it would take nearly 30 years for this case to be reignited. So before we jump in time here 30 years, let's go back to the strike that was happening and the Wackenhut security guards and stuff. I'm sure you're wondering, like, okay, well, what happened to all these scumbags? So right after Janet's murder, all right, like not long after it all, the strike ended. And the Wackenhut security guards, including the conspirators, the assaulters, the murderers, all went back home to their lives all across the country. And because the strike ended so quickly after, Janet's murder, and the guards came from all over the country, police never got the chance to interview every single guard. Robert, as we said, was married, and he ended up opening some sort of cosmetology school or salon or something with his wife, with whom he would have 2 children. I just wasn't sure if they were born before or after Janet's murder. Lori kept up the facade of missing her best friend. Yeah, she was going around acting like she, was so distraught over what happened to her roommate and best friend. And right after attending Janet's funeral, Lori left the state of Michigan and settled in Pennsylvania, where she became a nursing assistant at a hospital. Bubba and Freddie each relocated to West Virginia. I know Bubba ended up raising 2 autistic children and drawing Social Security or something. And I'm not quite sure what Freddie did. And I'm not too sure what Carl did, but I know he stayed within the state of Michigan. And Tony relocated to Wisconsin. But yeah, I don't have any details on what those scumbags did. But yeah, they were free for almost 30 years to go off and live their lives, have great times, make lots of memories, make friends, hang out with family. Meanwhile, Janet's case went cold. Then, in the spring of 2003, a professor at Hope College, who remember Janet attended, became fascinated with her case. Now, David Schock had first heard the name Janet Chandler that spring. David had interviewed a police officer that was getting ready to retire, and he asked that, age-old question, do you have any cases that still haunt you, any unsolved cases? And the officer said, yes, the Chandler case. And David said the officer, quote, carved her name in my heart. I thought and prayed and thought. I was absolutely haunted by Janet Chandler. She woke me up. She didn't let me sleep. And he was so, sort of obsessed with her case and her story that he wanted to make a documentary about it. He brought this idea up to his documentary film class, and the students who had heard of the infamous Janet Chandler case decided, you know what, yeah, let's make this documentary. Who knows? Maybe they could generate new leads. Maybe they could even solve it. They were getting pretty excited. No, maybe we can maybe we can solve this after so long. But, David cautioned his students against this, though, and was like, look, let's just go into this with the mindset of, telling Janet's story. But he did warn them, quote, the only thing I can promise you is that this is going to be painful. And with the Chandler's blessing, the students then began interviewing all of Janet's, old professors, acquaintances, anyone else who had known her. David said, quote, we were led to the Chandlers, and they were led to say yes to the documentary. From there, we started talking with police and interviewing former teachers. One of the film students was junior Sarah Hartman, and she was among those who actually interviewed Janet's parents for the documentary. Quote, the Chandlers talked about her as if she'd left the room 5 minutes ago. Everything about her was so real. So after getting interviews, the students' next step was to investigate and research life in Holland, Michigan in the 1970s. What was going on at that time? So, they headed to the library to, thumb through old newsreels and articles and stuff like that. And this is when they learned about the Chemtron plant strike. And then they learned, of course, right, that a lot of the Wackenhut guards had stayed at the Blue Mill Inn. And so they started to investigate the Blue Mill Inn further. Kind of start researching, okay, what was the work culture like back in the 70s at the Blue Mill Inn? What was that whole scene like? And as they dug more into Janet and her work life there, they of course came upon the name Lori Swank, discovered who Lori was, and discovered that, she had left town almost immediately after Janet's funeral. And since Lori, was supposed to have been, Janet's best friend and roommate, they wanted to see if they could interview her for the documentary, you know what I mean? But nobody knew where she was. As David said earlier, the students also interviewed the investigators who originally worked the case, including now retired Chief Lindstrom. And it was Lindstrom who kind of informed them about the numerous relationships that Janet had at the Blue Mill Inn, saying that she had developed relationships with a, quote, number of the individuals at the inn, but he didn't really elaborate further. He said that though about half a dozen suspects emerged over the years, no evidence was ever found to charge them with anything. The documentary ended with the Chandlers pleading and begging anyone with any information to come forward, and Jim acknowledged that he and Glenna might possibly, be dead before their daughter's case was solved. Quote, it'd be a whole lot better to find out who did this and see justice done. The killer will ultimately get punished, but we probably won't know about it. In 4 months, David and his class ended up making their 80-minute documentary, which they titled Who Killed Janet Chandler. It premiered in January of 2004, with even a limited theatrical release in the local area of Holland, including at the Knickerbocker Theater, which was in downtown Holland. It even aired on a Grand Rapids PBS station, and David said, quote, some thought it was an interesting idea, but some were pretty well creeped out by it. Sarah, though she was proud of what her and her class had made, was still frustrated with the lingering questions they had. Quote, we wanted to be able to bring the Chandler's peace, but all we ended up with were more questions. Now, the documentary was a pretty big local hit. Remember, this case had really done a number on the community. Everyone was aware of the Janet Chandler case. And it is said, as a result, the documentary ended up generating new tips and new leads. And it actually achieved the students' wildest dreams. It got police to reopen Janet's case. And it would officially be reopened in April of 2004. Holland Police Chief John Kruithoff had seen the documentary, and he had worked the case originally, I think either as a normal officer or a detective, but he had worked the original case. And he was already taking steps to get Janet's case reopened. He went out and got all of the old case files about Janet's case and called up the Michigan State Police. And her case would be officially reopened and worked by the Michigan State Police's regional cold case team with assistance from the Holland Police Department. And the investigative team would include Michigan State Police Detective Sergeants David Van Lopik, Jeff Floor, and Michael Jaffrey. And Holland Police Detectives Roger Van Leer and Robert Borowski. And Michigan State Police Lieutenant John Slank would be the one to supervise the team. And Slank said that at first he was kind of hesitant to take on Janet's case. Quote, quite frankly, initially I was hesitant to do it because I knew that it was going to involve a tremendous amount of time. He also knew that modern DNA technology would be of no use in this case. They hadn't gathered anything. Quote, there was physical evidence, but the physical evidence didn't bring any real value to this investigation. Van Lopik was a Holland native, so he was well aware of Janet's case. Quote, I felt committed to solving this case. And approximately 380 people would end up being interviewed/re-interviewed by the cold case team. And many of these people saw the documentary. Quote, a lot of the people that we interviewed were familiar with that documentary, even people out of state, which quite frankly surprised me. When this homicide happened, it really wrenched the community apart. When the documentary came out, it kind of opened the door to bring enough attention again to this homicide, and this was according to Detective Slank. Now, from April to June of 2004, the detectives pored over all of the old case files, went over all of the original information that they had, but Van Lopik said, quote, the one thing that we were missing was a clear picture of who Janet was, and Slank added, quote, we find oftentimes that the more we get to know about the victim, the more we understand the victim. The victim will oftentimes, even in death, point us to their killer or killers. This investigation would end up taking the detectives not only across the state of Michigan all over, but all across the country, like up to 18 states, including Iowa, Texas, Maine, Oregon, Wisconsin, Florida, Minnesota, and Pennsylvania. Yeah. All over. The next thing detectives did was re-interview all of Janet's family, friends, acquaintances. Quote, there was the Janet Chandler that her parents knew, and the one who was away from their influence. Now, one friend of Janet's explained her sort of double life that she said seemed to start around the time Janet started community college. Quote, when away from her family's influence or knowledge, she was out partying, drinking, smoking, and having sexual relationships with various people. And this was according to the detectives' reports. They found out about Janet's first sexual encounter and actually tracked down the groomer, who was now, of course, an old man. Van Lopik said, quote, he isn't proud of the relationship that he had with Janet and feels he may have taken advantage of her crush on him. May have? Are you kidding me? Oh, he feels bad. Oh yeah, screw him. He should feel bad. Detectives were also able to track down Lori, who now lived in Nescopic, Pennsylvania. She was now 40 years old, and remember we mentioned earlier, worked as a nursing assistant at a hospital. And they interviewed her about Janet, and she seemed like super emotional when they talked about Janet. She, talked about, oh, what a great person she was, and seemed to sort of like brighten up when talking about like the happy times. She described Janet as, quote, musical and fun-loving. And detectives couldn't help but notice, like how emotional Lori still was after all this time. Lori told them, quote, it made me physically ill. What could she have done to deserve to have this happen to her? Yeah, still putting on the show all these years later. But when the detectives showed Lori a photo that showed Janet with some of the guards, it is said Lori's mood changed. She kind of grew a little more somber. And she said, quote, they were a wild group who liked to party. She admitted that both she and Janet had had numerous sexual encounters with multiple guards at the inn, and she told them about having to reprimand Janet for having sex in one of the display suites at work. Lori also stated that she did not work the night that Janet was kidnapped, and she had no idea what had happened to her. Now, even though what Lori was telling them was intriguing them, they had more pressing leads and time-sensitive leads that they had to chase. So for the moment, they left Lori with that interview and proceeded with more interviews. By the end of October of 2004, they were coming up short, and so they had asked the public for help in conducting more interviews with former Wackenhut security guards. They asked anyone who might have stayed at the Blue Mill Inn in January or February of 1979 to come forward, and stated that they were particularly interested in the former Wackenhut security guards that had stayed there during that time. Holland Police Captain Matt Masser said, quote, case is never closed, but we decided to refocus. By January of 2005, police announced that there was an undisclosed sum of reward money for any information that led to a conviction in Janet's case. Police did not state how much the reward was, just stated that it was substantial and over $1,000. And when the new investigation was approaching the 1-year mark, things were not looking too good. None of their interviews had been fruitful or yielded any new or substantial information. Most of the guards that they had talked to claimed to have not remembered Janet at all or, remembered anything. Quote, the guards basically said, we worked 12-hour shifts and we just crashed at the motel. We didn't do anything other than work and eat and sleep, and this was according to Van Lopik. But after detectives spoke with one former guard who was at the inn during that time, named Glenn Johnson, the case would reach a turning point. Glenn now lived in Minneapolis, and he told detectives, though he himself did not know anything concrete or for sure, he had heard a rumor. Just a rumor, mind you, that another one of the guards, Robert Lynch, had been involved in Janet's murder. Based with this new information, Detective Flora went back and listened to the 911 call that Robert had placed back in 1979. And with this new information, he was listening to it again, and something sounded off to him. Quote, this sounds staged to me. There's no emotion. And so, of course, Robert was the next interview detectives sought. So when they came across Robert, he was 65 years old and lived in Three Oaks, Michigan, which was 80 miles from Holland, and he appeared to just be a normal guy. He and his wife had owned and operated their own beauty salon, school business, whatever. And he had 2 kids who were now grown. His son was a successful contractor, and his daughter was not much older than Janet when she was killed. And everything about Robert, just kind of seemed average, normal, except that there was one thing. There was one thing that police immediately kind of quirked an eyebrow out at and noticed about Robert, and that was his blatant alcoholism. He would down hard liquor as soon as he woke up. He didn't do much to hide it. And this just struck detectives as odd. Not just because of Robert's age, but just how much he drank, and I don't know if it was the way he drank or what, but to some of the detectives, it came across to them like Robert was maybe trying to drown something out. Now, their first interview with Robert didn't produce anything of use. Quote, we came away from that interview believing there was more involvement on his part than what he was telling us. Now, believing Robert was the first anything they had come across, they decided to go and interview people who knew Robert, either currently or formerly, who had worked with him, knew him, and just kind of see who this Robert Lynch guy was. And it is in the course of all these interviews and digging into Robert's life that they came across Robert's roommate who stayed with him in the Blue Mill Inn back in 1979, which was another former security guard named Harry Keith. Now, when the detectives first spoke with Harry, he denied knowing anything. Harry would later say that he wasn't quite sure when police first came to him, what, if anything, he should say, should he say anything at all? He wasn't quite sure what to tell them, if anything. And he would eventually come clean with detectives and confess that he was at that party. And he told detectives everything that he knew, and we'll get a little bit more into what he told detectives later on. So he did confess to being at the party. He also confessed that he had seen the documentary, and he said he noticed something in the documentary. There was a picture of Janet that was shown, and he knew that was a photo that he had personally taken. Harry then showed the detectives other photos that he had taken from back in those days, and there were many photos of Janet and the other guards. Quote, and this individual had a photo album full of photographs of parties, drinking, things like that, and this was according to Detective Borowski. This is also when detectives really discovered the hardcore party culture that encompassed the Blue Mill Inn and the Wackenhut security guards. Quote, it was a den of inequity. It was just a wild bunch of unsupervised people that were there to party, drink, use drugs, whatever, get involved in sexual escapades, whatever their little hearts desired. And in one particular photo, as they're discovering this culture and stuff, I'm guessing maybe Harry probably divulged some stuff. And they're looking through the photos, and they saw this one photo in particular of Janet, sitting on these guards' lap, guards that they had, interviewed, and who had told them that, I don't even really remember this Janet chick, what are you talking about? Sitting on their laps, in their uniform, just partying with them. This is also when detectives discovered how popular Janet was with the guards. Quote, and I think a lot through her naivete, Janet got sucked into things at that motel that should have never happened. Robert was also in these photos, and so detectives used that as an excuse to go interview him again. Detective Floor would end up heading this interrogation with Robert. Apparently he had a talent for getting suspects to confess under questioning. In fact, he had such a talent for it that he was known as the closer. He told Robert, quote, "Listen to me, all right? When you say to me you don't remember, I say bull." And detectives would end up doing several interviews with Robert, like a lot of interviews with him, which all yielded nothing until an interview in June of 2005. June of 2005 is when their persistence starts to pay off, all right? So in an interview in June of 2005, Robert stated that he was, quote, intimately involved with Janet, saying that the two of them had had a secret rendezvous at a house. He then unloaded a huge bombshell when he said that Janet was with a bunch of guards at a party that night. Quote, "Mr. Lynch commented to Jeff and I, well, it was a party that went haywire." And Detective Floor, tried to press Robert further. Quote, "I want you to tell me the plan about the party. What was the party supposed to be about?" And Robert replied he didn't know. Now, this of course intrigued them because this was the first time that police had heard anything about some kind of party that happened the night Janet was killed. And when Van Lopik attempted to, press Robert further about the supposed party, Robert clammed up. He actually didn't know anything about it. He had heard about it secondhand. And 11 days after this bombshell interview, Van Lopik decided to drive to Three Oaks to see Robert for a follow-up interview. And it was said that he found Robert in a, quote, reflective mood. They went to a park where they sat down on a bench and talked. Robert talked about his father, whom he had visited on his deathbed shortly before Janet's murder, and he told the detective, quote, "Oh hell, I regret my whole life, to be honest with you. Some of the things I've done, I don't even want to talk about. I mean, from high school clear back, Van Lopik then asked Robert if he believed in karma. And he straight up told Robert that he believed Robert drank to forget something. And Robert said, quote, "I'm not drinking to forget. I'm running from everything." And over the next 3 months, detectives would hold numerous interviews with Robert, slowly chipping away at his story. And at one of these interviews, one of the detectives produced a copy of the documentary. They showed the end where, Janet's parents were holding back tears and, they were just pleading for their daughter's case to be solved. Van Lopik said to Robert, quote, "You have a daughter Janet's age. If she were killed, wouldn't you want to know what happened to her? Just look at them, Bob." And finally, after 18 separate interrogations and interviews, Robert finally confessed to what he knew. He described how he and Bubba had gotten Janet ready that night before Floor interrupted, quote, "Tell me what you mean by ready." And Robert answered, quote, "By taping her eyes so she wouldn't know where she was going. In fact, he didn't even mess with her hands. He just said, 'This is a surprise. We're going to go to a party.'" He insisted the intention that night was not to kill Janet, only teach her a lesson, but that it got out of hand. He confessed that the robbery was a stage to cover Janet's kidnapping. He talked about how he had been at the lowest point of his life when Janet was killed. He said he spent an hour and a half with his father before his death, where his father said that he needed to find better work. Robert then confessed that he was one of the men who had sexually assaulted Janet, and said that he was frustrated with himself for wanting to belong to this group of guards that he knew he wasn't even going to see after the strike was over anyway. Yet there he was, beating, sexually assaulting a young woman, just in order to fit in. But he acknowledged this point didn't really matter, though. Floor said, quote, "I think you killed her. I think you know you killed her." And Robert confessed that yes, he was the one who killed Janet. He recounted the moments that he realized Janet was dead, how her chest felt as he tried to find a heartbeat, the vacant look in her eyes when he had ripped off the duct tape. Floor said, quote, "So when I say you had sex with her that day, that's the truth, right?" Robert said yes. Quote, "And when I say that you held the belt until she passed out and died, you checked her and she was dead, that's the truth?" And Robert said yes, quote, "But it wasn't intentional." He spoke about the utter chaos that broke out immediately afterward, and then he gave the names of the other people that he knew, that he remembered had been there. As we mentioned, Bubba and Freddie now lived in West Virginia, Tony lived in Wisconsin, and Carl, who Robert did paint as the ringleader, was still in Michigan, as we mentioned. But investigators were really floored when Robert said that there were women at the party. There were women who had seen the attack on Janet, and women who had jeered it. Robert said there was one woman in particular who was intent on getting Janet. quote, "She played the role of Janet's best friend, but actually, I don't think she was." He said this woman was one of the primary planners of the party, but when Fleur asked what this woman's name was, Robert said he couldn't remember. And at that point, detectives started to track down all of Janet's old friends, acquaintances, and co-workers. They came along Diane, and at first, she wasn't very forthcoming, but much like they had done with Robert, they continuously came at her and began chipping away at her story. And finally, she broke down and confessed to what she knew. She told them she had been standing on the balcony of the inn that night with Tony, Cheryl, Glenn Johnson, and another guard named Michael Chandler, who was unrelated to Janet. She said she saw Bubba take Janet and that Janet's hands were handcuffed behind her back. Quote, "I don't think she could have run away. He was holding her, Bubba was." She watched Bubba direct Janet into the backseat of a vehicle and leave. She said she was still on the balcony when Bubba returned to the inn, sans Janet, and he told her the robbery story and the whole bit about him being on the phone with Janet. Diane said that she was well aware that this was a lie. She knew about the party and that the plan was to get, Janet out. She knew all this. But, Bubba was telling her, it had actually happened. She said later that day she worked her regular 8 a.m. to noon shift at the inn, and her and Cheryl did talk about going to the party later on. Because everyone was going to be there and yeah, it should be fun. And remember, at this time, Diane was dating another guard, Freddie Parker. And then Cheryl was supposed to have been dating Tony. Cheryl was the next one that police interviewed, and much like with Diane, she wasn't very forthcoming to police at first, and they had to chip away at her story. And finally, she confessed to what she knew. She said for the plan for Janet that night was, quote, to strangle her, to torture her. She said that after Janet was dead and the party was dispersing and everything was chaotic, she said Carl had threatened her and said that if she or anyone said anything about what happened, the same thing that happened to Janet would happen to her. Cheryl claimed that she continued to receive threats from the men over the years, including Carl, and so she hadn't said anything to anyone for close to 30 years. Except at some point in her life, Cheryl did confide in her parents about what she had been a witness and party to, and in trash fashion, because, shocker, they raised a trash daughter, her parents told her that she should never say anything or she could get in trouble. Yeah. Big shock that Cheryl turned out to be such a scuzzbag, right? Look what her parents just told her. And so for nearly 30 years, Cheryl too had kept her mouth shut. And then finally, on Tuesday, February 8th, 2006, Robert, who is now 66 years old, was arrested at the Bridgman State Police Post on a 3-count criminal warrant that had been filed jointly by the Ottawa County Prosecutor's Office and the Michigan Attorney General's Office. He was charged with 1 count of first-degree murder and 2 counts of felony murder for murdering during the process of a kidnapping and sexual assault. And his defense attorney was listed as Andrew Birch. Now, Robert's only conviction before this had been in 2003 for drunk driving, and this was in Berrien County. And it is when Robert is arrested that the public was told that an arrest had finally been made in the Janet Chandler case. Van Lopik decided to bring Robert in and officially arrest him after Robert had expressed some troubling thoughts that he had expressed to Van Lopik, and Van Lopik thought he might try to kill himself. So he was like, oh, hell no, we can't let that happen. So he decided to arrest him right there. Remember David Schock, said of Robert's arrest, quote, "It is rare to be in a position where you can do something that will result in justice. I'll tell you what, it's humbling. It will knock you to your knees. They have a lot to do if this man is guilty. Janet Chandler didn't deserve to die." Kruthoff told the press that Robert was being cooperative and shocked the public when he announced that more arrests would be forthcoming in connection to the case. He acknowledged the deep wound and scar that Janet's murder had left on the community. Quote, "This open wound that has been with the family and the police department for 27 years can finally start to heal. Since the day the cold case investigation was announced in April 2004, the investigators were certain they could solve it. Their unwavering determination has brought us to this point." Attorney General Michael Cox added, quote, "Those who choose to commit heinous acts of this nature need to know that the pursuit of justice never ends." Robert's friends and neighbors were completely floored and shocked, not just that Robert was arrested, but what he was being accused of and what he had been arrested for. Quote, I am absolutely shocked. You never hear anything about him. You never see him outside, hardly ever. Maybe in the summertime, but that's about it. Otherwise, you don't hardly see him at all. And this was according to neighbor Lori Petrick. A former employee, Carrie Foltz, said, quote, I'm just kind of shocked. I would have never thought that. She had worked for Robert and his wife at their Three Oaks hair salon for a few months back in 1966. Quote, I saw him coming and going. I knew who he was. He was actually kind of a nice-looking man. He seemed really nice. He just seemed okay. He seemed normal. Thomas Krieger had known Robert for quite some time. He actually went to school with Robert's son. He had actually met Robert's son in kindergarten, and the two of them had graduated River Valley High School together in 1986. Thomas described Robert as easygoing, laid back, and said that he had recently moved onto the same street as Robert and would often come by to visit him as often as he could. He said, quote, I knew his son since kindergarten. We played in Little League together. I remember going up to their cabin in Baldwin for deer hunting. The entire family was normal. I thought he was a nice guy. I've never seen the guy angry. He just went about his business. He's quiet. It surprises the hell out of me. I just would have never guessed. Robert was arraigned on February 9th in Ottawa County's 58th District Court in Holland before District Court Judge Bradley Knoll. He ordered Robert held without bond, and his preliminary hearing was then scheduled. And Robert was facing life without parole if convicted on any of the charges. And he had an additional court-appointed attorney named Richard C. Hamilton by this point. By Friday, February 11th, the probable cause affidavit was released to the public, and this is when the gruesome details about Janet's death and the surprise party was revealed to the public. Detective Van Lopik spoke in the affidavit about the party that was held for Janet. Quote, part of the plans were to take Janet Chandler to this party. Janet Chandler was then contacted by Lynch and another security guard that evening. They then blindfolded her and taped her mouth and escorted her to a waiting vehicle. He spoke about the sexual assaults and the belt. Quote, different individuals placed a belt around Janet Chandler's neck and were pulling on the belt. And it was stated in the affidavit that it was Robert, specifically, who had killed Janet, along with driving her body to where it would ultimately be found. And the police reiterated that more men were expected to be arrested in connection with the case. Robert was bound over for trial on Friday, March 25th, and it was announced that Ottawa County Circuit Court Judge Edward Post would be presiding over the trial. And it would take another 4 months for detectives to piece together everything that happened that night, and this was due to more interviews with Robert, along with continuing interviews as more names came to his mind. Robert, at some point during those 4 months, finally remembered Lori's name and gave it to detectives. Quote, he just mentioned that he remembered a female, Lori, and they were floored that Lori's former roommate, former supervisor, her supposed best friend, had been in on the whole thing. They were especially, floored because when they interviewed Lori, she still seemed so distraught over the whole thing and really emotional at what had happened to her friend. So they were especially floored when Robert dropped her name. So, of course, they went back to Lori, who expressed shock at Robert's nearly 30-year-old secret. And she said, quote, how can you live with yourself having knowledge of that? How can you live with it? I couldn't. The dudes, really? Can you believe she said this? The audacity. But Fleur told Lori about Robert's accusation. Quote, so the killer pointed the finger at you. That's how we came back here. You just have to tell the truth so that I know. Look at me. I've got to know. And after several interrogations, just like they had with Robert, they finally got Lori to crack. Fleur said, quote, you saw Lynch kill her, didn't you? Just tell the truth. Give up the battle. Just give up the battle and tell me you saw it. He hammered on and on. Quote, you were there when she died, weren't you? That's why you ran. Come on, come on. And Lori finally shouted yes. Yes, she was there. Yes, she saw Janet die, and yes, she had been a primary organizer and planner of the party. Also, probably through interviews with Lori and Robert and all that, police managed to track down Patty Bright, who was now Patty Bright Ward, and she confessed to detectives that Carl had threatened her, and so she had alibied him that night, and she said that he had threatened her, saying that she would be found dead on the roadside if she ever spoke about what she knew. She also corroborated Robert's assertion that Carl was the main ringleader in the whole thing. And on Monday, September 18th, 2006, police finally arrested Bubba, who is now 58 years old, and Freddie, who is 49, in West Virginia, Bubba in Rand, and Freddie in Gauley Bridge, and they were arrested on fugitive justice warrants. Bubba was held in the South Central Regional Jail in Charleston, and Kanawha County, West Virginia Public Defender Ronnie Sheets was assigned to Bubba's case. Well, Freddie was held in the Southern Regional Jail in Beaver, and defense attorney Tim LaFawn was assigned to his case. And both of them were waiting in jail in West Virginia for their extradition hearing, so they would be extradited to Michigan. Now, the same day those two were arrested, Lori, who was 48, Tony, who was 55, and remember, lived in Wisconsin, and Carl, who was 54, were all tracked down and arrested that same day. On September 20th, police came out and told the press that they had made an additional 5 arrests in connection with Janet's case. They didn't release a lot of information as to why or how they made these additional arrests, just that Robert had been cooperative, had named some names, and that Carl was the main guy. At a press conference speaking about the arrests, Attorney General Cox said, quote, "It has always been the mission of all parties involved in this investigation to ensure that the family of Janet Chandler sees justice. That day is now coming closer." They named the 5 others that they had arrested and stated that they were being charged with the exact same things as Robert. Kruthoff said that they did not expect to make any further arrests in the case, and that they were, quote, "confident we have identified those responsible for Janet's death." Freddie's sister, Annette Bennett, immediately came out defending her brother, claiming that he had left the state of Michigan before Janet's murder. Quote, "My brother is innocent. My brother would not hurt a flea." His brother, Eddie, said he didn't believe that investigators had any evidence linking his brother to this murder other than Robert's confession. Quote, "It would really surprise me if he really did this. After 27 years, I don't think he could keep it in. I don't think he could hold something like that in all these years." Oh, please. Why do people always... I mean, I get it because it's your family, but like, why do people do this? Did you ever stop to think that maybe you only saw one side of your brother that he chose to show you? Freddie's attorney, LaFawn, also questioned why police had evidence now all of a sudden. Quote, "I don't understand how suddenly the police and the detectives know the details of this case when it took them 27 years to investigate. Why didn't they have them for 27 years? Apparently, LaFawn here has never heard of cold cases." Like, I just thought that, like, I mean, I guess it's the most you have to defend this scumbag, but like, oh, why now all of a sudden? Why didn't they have these 27 years ago? It's called a cold case, dumbass. New information came to light. Carl, meanwhile, outright denied any involvement in anything to do with Janet. He proclaimed he was innocent. Quote, "I can't believe that everyone that was supposedly there would say I was there." Screw you, Carl, you scumbag piece of trash. By Saturday, September 23rd, a police affidavit was released to the public, and it stated in there that there was anywhere from 15 to 20 people at that party where Janet was assaulted and murdered. But authorities were saying realistically, there was no way that they were going to arrest every single person who was there that night. Quote, "What we tried to do is identify the people with the most culpability. There is no way we are ever going to charge 15 to 20 people. Some of the peripheral players are going to fall through the cracks," and this was according to Lieutenant Slink. The affidavit stated that they believed 3 other guards had sexually assaulted Janet, and there were 2 others who knew about the plans for the party. Quote, "Are we going to be able to get enough evidence to charge and convict them? Maybe not." There were also witnesses, like other witnesses that detectives had tracked down, but they claimed to all fear for their lives and basically reiterated what Patty, Cheryl, and Diane had said, that, you know, Carl and the others had threatened them if they ever spoke. And there were many in this case who were just like baffled and shocked that so many people would keep quiet about this for so long. It's pretty amazing, right? On Tuesday, September 26th, Bubba waived his extradition hearing in Kanawha County in West Virginia and was being prepared to be sent to Michigan to face trial. But he was still maintaining his innocence, stating that he had only had consensual sex with Janet. On Thursday, the 28th, 2 days later, Freddie had his extradition hearing in Fayette County Court, and he declared he was going to fight extradition. He also now had a new attorney, Charleston attorney Michael DelGiudice. The next day on Friday, September 29th, it was revealed to the public that what had kept so many people silent for so long was the threat of these supposed photos. This is when the tidbit about Carl arranging for photos to be taken during what was going on to Janet was revealed. It was reported that the photos depicted, people assaulting Janet, tugging on the belt, and, all of that. Quote, "Because these photographs showed most everyone present taking turns holding the belt around Janet's neck, except Paiva. Paiva was reportedly able to make everyone dirty. This is how Paiva was able to keep everyone from talking about the incident for so many years," and this was according to Detective Jaffrey. And on October 27th, Tony was held without bond in Ottawa County in Michigan. I tried finding out more information about each one of these individuals, like extradition extraditions and stuff like that. But there's really not a lot of information out there. I think Tony was extradited. I don't think he fought it like Freddie. I think Freddie was the only one who fought extradition to Michigan. So at this point, in October, the end of October, Tony was in Michigan, held without bond and all that stuff. Tony's defense attorney was Philip Sealski, who tried to argue that his client should be released on bond because he had cooperated with the investigation and had passed an initial polygraph examination in 1979. But the judge had denied him. Tony was also maintaining his innocence with his attorney, saying, quote, "He was not present. He had nothing to do with the murder and has consistently denied his involvement since February 1st, 1979. And then after he was denied bond, Tony, Bubba, who was in Michigan at that point, Carl, and Lori were all scheduled to have a preliminary hearing on the same day in December, while Robert's trial was then slated for January. Freddie was still fighting extradition in West Virginia, and he had a hearing scheduled for October 30th, but that would end up getting delayed quite a few times due to Del Judas requesting delay after delay constantly. In January of 2007, he successfully petitioned Fayette County Circuit Court Judge John Hatcher to delay the hearing yet again until February. And Del Judas kept saying that, like, oh, well, we need more time to prepare, we need to go through more paperwork, and yada, 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 and just kept getting delay after delay. On Monday, December 18th, 2006, before his trial could begin, Robert took a plea deal. He pled guilty to second-degree murder and now faced a 25-year to life prison sentence. Birch, his attorney, said that Robert hoped that Janet's family would find some peace after all this. Quote, "It's a tragic situation. It would be hard to build a case for sympathy for my client in light of how bad the situation was almost 28 years ago, but he's lived a good life since then, raised a family." Cox called Robert's plea, quote, "an important step in the pursuit of justice for Janet Chandler and her family." On Thursday, January 18th, 2007, Lori waived all of her hearings and announced that she was going to plead guilty and testify against the others at their trial. And she also divulged some additional information that included why she participated in this supposed party. She stated in court that she had feelings for Carl, was jealous of the attention that he was giving Janet. She knew how jealous Carl was, how much sex Janet was having, and she knew it would enrage Carl if she told him. She said Carl vowed to take care of Janet. Quote, "They were going to pass her around. They were going to be putting her in her place, so to speak, because she thought a lot of herself. Bring her down a few notches. Teach her a lesson." She admitted in court that she witnessed the attack on Janet, and on that same day, Carl, Bubba, and Tony all entered pleas of not guilty, and they were ordered to stand trial in Holland District Court. And at this point in time, Freddie was still in West Virginia, fighting extradition as we went over. On January 22nd, Robert was officially sentenced to 25 to 40 years behind bars. Janet's parents, of course, attended this hearing, and during their victim impact statements, they addressed one of their daughter's killers for the first time. Glenna said, quote, "You broke our family circle, but it will be complete again in heaven with Janet. Tell us, what lesson did you teach your family? You, Mr. Lynch, took her life, but you never took her soul. God will be your final judge, not us. May he have mercy." Jim, meanwhile, thanked the many police officers who had worked his daughter's case, thanked the film students for their documentary, but he had trouble completing a statement when it came to Robert. Quote, "What can I say to people of no conscience or regard for human life?" And he started shaking and then crying, and he had to be led away. He couldn't finish his impact statement. After this, Robert walked to the podium and said, quote, "I hope the family rests in peace, and I ask forgiveness from Janet. I worked hard for 18 months to see this come to an end, and I hope it does." Robert is currently incarcerated at the G. Robert Cotton Correctional Facility, located in Jackson County, Michigan. His earliest probable release date is June 21st, 2026, with his maximum release date slated for January 25th, 2030. The same month Robert was sentenced, Freddie had his extradition hearing in West Virginia. He was claiming that he left the state of Michigan 9 days before Janet's murder. And I don't know when, but Freddie would eventually lose this fight and he would be extradited back to Michigan to stand trial for Janet's murder. I tried finding articles or something about this, but I couldn't find anything. On Monday, February 5th, Lori officially pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, and as part of her plea deal, she of course agreed to testify against the men in their trial, and the agreement was for her to receive a 10 to 20-year prison sentence, which wouldn't officially be handed out until the end of the upcoming trials. And finally, Carl, Bubba, Freddie, and Tony all stood trial in October of 2007, and Lori was the prosecution's star witness. Now, since of course they didn't have any physical evidence to tie any of these people to Janet's murder, the prosecution was having to rely on a lot of witness testimony, all right? And they called in a lot of witnesses, and we'll get into their testimonies. Now, since Robert suffered from alcohol-related dementia, Michigan Assistant Attorney General Donna Pendergast did not want to, wholly rely on Robert as a witness. You know what I mean? She wanted other corroborating testimonies for more reliable witnesses. Quote, "And I simply did not find him credible enough to put in front of the jury and say, I, as a prosecutor, am asking you to believe this." Lori testified. She ended up testifying and admitted to her jealousy and bitterness at Janet. Pendergast asked her, quote, "Did Janet's relationship with the guards create any problems with you on a personal level?" And she admitted, quote, "Yes, because I became jealous. She was more popular. I was less popular." She admitted about her crush on Carl, how Janet was in the way, and how that was what motivated her to tell Carl about Janet's sexual antics. Pendergast said, quote, "Why did you give this information to Mr. Paiva?" She said it was, quote, "to anger him, make him think less of Janet." She asked her how Carl reacted. Quote, "He would get angry, frustrated. He got upset." Pendergast then asked her, quote, "Did he ever say anything that he intended to do in regards to this information?" And Lori told Carl that he told her, quote, he would take care of it. And that's when the surprise party was hatched, with Carl, herself, Robert, Bubba, two other guards named Ron Wyrick and Robin Clunky, and a woman named Liz Schaffner, all conspiring together. This is what Lori testified to. She said Carl approached her at some point and let her know that they would need someone to cover Janet's shift when they kidnapped her. They told Lori that they would call her once she had been kidnapped, and that is when Lori was supposed to go and cover the front desk. And I'm not sure what happened with that, because as we know, Lori did not come to cover Janet's shift, so I'm not sure what happened with that. And when Pendergast asked Lori on the stand what Carl had told her what would happen at this party, Lori responded with, quote, "They were going to fuck Janet to death." And the prosecutor pressed on, quote, "Tell the members of the jury why you went to Mr. Paiva's residence." And she said, quote, "I went to see what they were doing to Janet." And Pendergast then asked her, quote, "Was Janet already being sexually assaulted when he came into the room?" Lori answered yes and described in graphic detail what she saw. She said Janet was naked, bound with her hands behind her back. Her ankles were also bound, and her eyes were taped shut, as was her mouth. She described the belt wrapped around Janet's neck and stated that she personally saw Carl, Freddie, Bubba, and Robert all sexually assault Janet. She said as Carl was assaulting Janet, he would shout, stuff like, "How do you like that, bitch? Yeah, take that, bitch," and stuff, as he was actively assaulting Janet. Pendergast went on, quote, "Tell the court what you did in that room, Miss Swink." And Lori responded, quote, "I was part of the cheering section. I observed. I called Janet a bitch numerous times. I watched. I became upset at one point. I saw, they were all using the belt around Janet's neck." And when the prosecutor asked why on earth Lori would ever participate in something like this, she only said, quote, "I was angry. Jealous." And when asked how she could justify it to herself, Lori said, quote, "I can't." She said 1 second they were all jeering and laughing, and then, quote, "All of a sudden I heard somebody say she's dead. She was motionless." And when asked what she did, Lori said she ran. She also admitted on the stand that one of the reasons she had kept quiet all of these years was the fear that she would be charged as well. Cheryl also testified, and she described what she first saw when she arrived at Carl's house with Diane that night. She said the table was full of beer and marijuana. There were candles lit around here and there. And there were also several guards, including Glenn Johnson, along with Patty and another woman named Sharon. She said Janet was in a big room at that point. I think she meant kind of like the living room, because she described it as sort of like the room that you sort of like walk into when you enter. She said she saw Lori in the crowd watching what was going on, and she described what the crowd was looking at. She said Janet was naked on all fours, on her hands and knees, bound in handcuffs, scarves, and other materials. But she testified that she didn't remember seeing duct tape on Janet. So remember, most of what we're about to describe here are eyewitness testimonies, all right? So there's probably going to be some conflicting details. She said Janet was on the floor, and she testified that as she looked on, Bubba was forcing Janet to give him oral sex as she was wearing the belt, while others poured hot wax on her back. She specifically named Carl, Tony, and Freddie as being there as well, and said that she saw Tony ejaculating on Janet's back as this was happening. She described him as laughing, drinking, smoking weed, just having a really good time, while gleefully shouting like, "Oh, it's my turn, bro, it's my turn, it's my turn." Like he was super stoked at what was happening right now. She stated that at first, she'd been happy at the prospect of this party, you know? She wanted Janet to get her comeuppance, you know what I mean? And, you know, she felt like, oh, this is when Janet's gonna get her just desserts. But she testified on stand that as she stood there and watched what was happening to Janet, she really couldn't, believe what was going on. She was shocked at how much abuse Janet was taking. She claimed that she had no idea that the party was going to go as far as it did, and that she couldn't believe when they put the belt on Janet and when they the way they were tugging her around and stuff. She said she couldn't believe that. Quote, "I didn't think it was going to be this rough. I didn't think they were going to go to this extreme." She said she probably looked on for about 5 minutes or so before she left to go to the restroom. She said when she came out, Janet had been moved to the bedroom at that point. She testified that she approximated about 10 to 15 guards had sexually assaulted Janet, and she was positive Carl was one of those men. She explained how angry Carl was at Janet for sleeping around. And she said, quote, "I heard Carl several times say to Janet, 'I'm gonna get you back, you bitch, and you're gonna die.'" She talked about the crowd cheering everything going on and the stuff that they shouted, "You fucking bitch, you deserve this, take it, bitch, take it." Glenna was in the audience when Cheryl was testifying about all this, and when the court broke for recess, she had to be escorted out of the courtroom, and she didn't return that day. Ugh. Can you imagine hearing these awful details about your own daughter? After the recess, Cheryl testified to how much of a ringleader Carl was, including organizing in which order the guards were going to sexually assault Janet, with him going first. Quote, "He would say, 'You're next, and you can go after that.'" She testified that she knew for a fact that Bubba, Freddie, and Tony had all taken turns sexually assaulting Janet, all at various points. They had all tugged and jerked on the belt. They had all pulled Janet's hair. And she testified that some of them sexually assaulted Janet vaginally, while others assaulted her anally. She stated at one point she saw Tony assaulting Janet from behind while pulling on her hair. And as he was doing that, Bubba was tugging and jerking on the belt around her neck. She said as she saw Tony assaulting Janet, she thought to herself, quote, "That used to be my boyfriend," claiming that they had broken up by the time the party happened. However, back in February of 1979, when police interviewed Cheryl, she told them that she was currently staying with Tony at that time and that they were going to move into a duplex together. She also stated that she personally did not see any photographs being taken, but she did see some flashes coming out of the bedroom, from a camera. She talked about how chaotic it was after Janet had been killed, how she heard shouts about Janet being dead, and she said that she saw guards attempting to clean Janet's body in the restroom. She said she herself never saw Robert assaulting Janet, pulling on the belt, or killing her. I think she'd stepped away and was in the kitchen at that point. But she did say that she could hear the yelling and the jeers coming from the bedroom. They were being that loud. And she stated that she did see the events that transpired right after Janet was dead. She said she and Diane were scared, and she spoke about how she had been threatened by a few of the men to never say a word. Quote, "Bubba did, and Carl did, told me to shut my mouth, that they were going to do the same thing that they did to Janet to me. Tony, Bubba, and Carl told me not to ever say one word to anyone, or I would end up just like Janet Chandler." She claimed to have received continuous threats from them over the years, warning her not to talk. And the defense peppered Cheryl with numerous questions about these continuous threats, asking for dates and times and stuff like that. They hammered on her inconsistent statements that she had given to the police and asked her to clarify who exactly had threatened her over the years. They were really zeroing in on Cheryl's claims that the men had continued threatening her over the years. It said Cheryl stammered a lot while she was on cross-examination. She stumbled. She had to have a lot of questions rephrased or repeated because she didn't understand them. She mumbled a lot, and she denied that she stayed silent all these years because she was afraid she would be charged too. She denied that. She claimed she only stayed quiet due to the continuous threats that she had received over the years. Patty Ward testified as well, and she said that she had gone to the party that night, to Carl's home that night, because she was supposed to meet up with him. She had heard there was going to be a party there, and she's like, oh, okay, great, I can meet up with him there. She testified to the people she remembered being at that party, which included, of course, Carl, that Robin Clunky, or Robbie, as she said guy, Bubba, another guard named Willie Bass, Robert, that woman named Sharon that Cheryl had mentioned, and another woman named Marlene. She said she remembered that there were way more people at the party, but that's just who she remembered, and there was also a lot of people at that party that she didn't know. She also couldn't remember how she had gotten to Carl's that night. At first she thought she had went with that woman named Sharon, like her friend, but when she was on the stand, she said it might have been her friend Marlene. She said she remembered her friend Sharon was there to see a guard named Matt something or other that night. That's why her friend Sharon was there. And when she herself first arrived, she talked to Carl and some other people that she knew. She said the party seemed kind of like a normal one, you know, beer and weed were there was some music playing, people were sort of like talking and hanging out. And yeah, remember, she was only there to meet up with Carl. Remember, she was like dating or messing around with him at that time. Now remember, I said earlier, Carl's house was described as a sort of like cottage house, guest house, or whatever, with like different levels. But Patty said she remembered walking to Carl's house and first entering the party through patio doors on the lower level of the house. She remembered seeing Carl, Bubba, Robert, that Willie Bass guy, that Robbie Clunky guy. And that was when she first entered. That's who she immediately spotted. And she also saw a girl, fully clothed, sitting on the couch and heard Bubba shouting, quote, "I said get over here." She said the girl got up and Bubba yelled at her, "I said get over here, bitch." And she said that's when she witnessed Bubba grabbing his belt and sort of like throwing it and kind of lassoing the girl. Like the belt went around her waist, and when it did that, he then pulled the girl forcefully towards him. The girl let out a yelp, and Patty said at that point she spoke up and was like telling Bubba like, "Hey, you don't have to do that, you know, like you can simmer down." And she said at that moment Bubba marched up to her, got in her face, pointed a finger in her face, and told her, quote, "I'll do the same thing to you, bitch. You don't get in someone else's business." And she stated like she was really scared. She immediately backed off at that point. She said Carl did tell Bubba to back down and not to do that, like speak to her like that. And she said at some point, Bubba led this girl down the hall, around a corner, into a bedroom, pulling her by her arm. And a few people followed, and Patty said that she kind of followed that way because she saw Carl going there as well. And so she went in there and got to peek inside the bedroom, and inside the bedroom she saw the girl and Bubba sitting on the bed. She asked if everything was all right, and everyone, including the girl on the bed, was like, "Yeah, everything's fine." She said Carl was standing in front of her when she tried to like peek into the bedroom, and like he kept maneuvering himself so that he was slowly kind of shuffling her further and further away and out of the bedroom. She said at that point she returned to the rest of the party, and she said at some point, she didn't remember when, but she did see Bubba and the girl head upstairs. And she remembered there were two other people right behind them, but she didn't remember who they were. She said she remembered Carl disappearing for like 20 to 30 minute increments throughout the party, and you know, she was kind of annoyed. She was there to see Carl, you know what I mean? And she kept noticing that he kept disappearing for 20 or 30 minutes at a time, and then he would come back and mingle in with the party again. She said she didn't know if he had went upstairs or where he went. She just remembered being very annoyed that he kept disappearing. She didn't know a lot of people at this party, and she was only there to see him. She said she was trying to, talk to people at the party, mingle a little bit, as you do at a party, right? But that the mood seemed kind of strange to her. She described it as eerie. She said everybody was sort of quiet, was kind of murmuring and talking quietly. They weren't really engaging with her, and she just kind of found everyone's behavior sort of odd and unsettling. She said at some point her friend Sharon reappeared. I guess she had been up on the higher level or something, and she had come back down. And Patty said that when she saw her friend said something to her that disturbed her. She said Sharon was looking and acting strange. She was quiet. Maybe she seemed like maybe dazed or something like that. And to Patty, she said it seemed like, Sharon knew something was wrong, but she was trying to hide the fact, and she was trying to act cool, but she was failing miserably at it. And Patty was asking her what was wrong, and Patty said out of the side of her mouth, very, very quietly, Sharon whispered to her that she thought someone on the upper level was getting gangbanged. And after that, Patty happened to see Carl, and so right after Sharon told her this, she marched right up to Carl, who had disappeared about 3 times at this point, and she demanded to know what was going on. Where was he going? What is happening? She testified that she thought maybe Carl and his friends had sex workers up on the higher level, and they were all having orgies or some sex party or something out there. That's what she thought was happening. She thought that was why Carl Carl kept disappearing for 20 or 30 minutes at the time, and she was incensed. She said she feared to go to the higher level because she didn't want to see what they were doing. And she said her and Carl got into an argument about him, disappearing. She said as they were arguing, someone rushed past her and whispered in Carl's ear. And that is when Carl tipped a desk over, threw a chair, and said the fucking party was over. So I guess, according to Patty's testimony, Carl wasn't physically in the room when Janet was killed, if, we're to believe Patty's testimony. She said there was a lot of commotion and chaos after this. She said she remembered someone, rushing past her saying, "Oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck." She said after this, she left through the back door, through the kitchen with Sharon, and that the two headed back to Sharon's apartment. She said sometime later that evening, Carl called her, said he wanted to see her. She said that when they did meet up, he told her that some detectives might come around asking her some questions. And he told her that, hey, if I tell them that we were, partying and all that stuff, they won't leave me alone, they won't let up, and they'll harass you. So Patty was like, hey, don't worry about it. I'll just tell the police you were with me. She then asked him, well, what would happen if I didn't alibi you, if I didn't say this, that you were with me all night? Carl told her that the police would find her on the side of a road in a body bag. So when Patty had been interviewed back in 1979, she alibied him. And she also said the reason she could remember as many details as she could about that night is because her birthday is on February 1st. That security guard, Glenn Johnson, also testified. He described the culture of the Wackenhut guards, describing it as a refuge for drinkers and dopers, as he put it. He admitted on the stand that he was at the party that night, though he stated he wasn't really looking forward to going because he had stopped drinking a few years before that, and he was scared that if he went to this party, where beer and weed and everything else was flowing, that he was going to break his sobriety. But he had to go because he had some business to attend to with Carl, but he couldn't remember what that business was. So he went to Carl's house that night with Harry Keith. He said he saw Carl there, Freddie, a guy named Halverson, that Robin Clunky guy, and others were there, but he either couldn't remember their names or he didn't know them. And he did admit there were some women there, but he didn't know them either. He talked about the relationship that Janet and Carl had had. Quote, Janet and Carl had fairly well broken up. They were hating each other, Carl more than Janet. He said after his business with Carl was done, he did stay around milling and hanging out a little bit, drinking on a soda. He said on the stand that he couldn't remember now, why he didn't leave immediately after he had concluded his business with Carl. He thought maybe he was waiting for Harry to leave or something like that since they drove there together. But he did say at some point in the night, he noticed that there was a large gathering of people going in and out of the bedroom. And he knew this was a bedroom because he had been to Carl's house before. He testified that he remembered seeing Robert among those clustered in the bedroom. And he said he also remembered Freddie, but he was unable to name anyone else that he saw in the room. It had just been too long. When asked if he had heard any commotion or sounds or anything coming from the bedroom, Glenn said that where he was with the party, kind of with that normal party ambience, people talking and stuff like that, he himself did not hear anything coming from the bedroom. He also stated on the stand that he himself never entered the bedroom. He said all of a sudden, he's sitting there milling around, whatever, sipping on a soda, when all of a sudden there was an explosion of people pouring from the direction of the bedroom. He said he heard shouts of oh shit, oh fuck, oh shit, she's dead, and stuff like that. And he said he remembered just a bunch of people trying to get out of the doorway all at once. He remembered seeing Robert and Carl among those who were running from the commotion, and he stated he knew there were other guards and at least 2 women who had also come parading out of there, but he couldn't remember who they were. The next day, Diane, who had moved back to Michigan from Texas, also took the stand at the men's trial as a witness for the prosecution. She verified a lot of what Lori had testified to and spoke about how, yes, she was aware of the upcoming party. Quote, they were going to teach her a lesson. It was going to be like a gangbang. She said that they were in Bubba's room at the inn a couple of days before Janet's kidnapping, and it was there when Bubba, Tony, Cheryl, and herself discussed what would happen. She said both men told her and Cheryl that there was going to be a surprise party for Janet. They were going to teach her a lesson, and that the plan was to gangbang her. She spoke about going to the party with Cheryl that night, and upon arriving, seeing her then boyfriend Freddie and Janet. She said she saw Janet in the bedroom. She had seen all the people gathered around there and decided to go see what was up, why everyone was crowded around. And she saw Janet and described her as, quote, she was a mess. She looked very scared. She said Janet was nude with her hands bound behind her back. She was bound with handcuffs. She said she saw Tony, Bubba, Freddie, Carl, and Robert all in the bedroom with Janet. Quote, they were sexually assaulting her. They pretty much all took turns. She said she saw Lori in the crowd, cheering it all on, and she also saw several people punching Janet and pulling on her hair as she was being assaulted. She said that she saw Bubba flip Janet onto her stomach and begin sexually assaulting her anally. She said she saw Tony assault Janet vaginally, saw her own boyfriend Freddie assault Janet vaginally, and even though Cheryl said she did not witness Robert assaulting or killing Janet, Diane said that she did. Quote, he pulled it, the belt. Then it got really quiet and someone said she was dead. And even though Patty's testimony had her talking to Carl, like the second Janet was dead, Diane testified that Carl was in the bedroom when all of this went down. So who knows, this is what it is when it's just pure eyewitness testimony, right? And it's been almost 30 years, you know? So yeah, that's why we have some inconsistencies here. Diane said she also saw Tony, Carl, Freddie, Robert, and Bubba cleaning up Janet's body in the bathroom. They were wiping it down with water, and she said the last time she saw Janet's body, they were rolling it up in some kind of tarp. She said she and Cheryl left the party right after that and stated that she never saw anyone from that party ever again, but did admit she did in fact see several of these people in February of 1979. And this was after Janet's death, but before her funeral. She said she, Cheryl, Tony, Bubba, Freddie, Carl, that guard named Michael Chandler, that other guard named Ron Wyrick, and Robert all met up at the inn. This was right after Janet's death. She said at this meetup, Bubba was bragging about what he had done to Janet, that they had all really gave it to her and showed her, really taught her a lesson. She said Tony and Freddie were also boasting about what happened, as did Carl, who was also bragging. Diane said, quote, they were being really loud about it. She testified that she'd been threatened a couple of days after the party, before Janet was taken, and before this bragging session by Bubba and Tony. Quote, that not to say anything about what happened, to keep our mouths shut or it could happen to us. She admitted she had lied to investigators back in 1979 and also lied to them several times between 2004 and 2006 when they interviewed her. And she claimed to, fear for her life, which is why she was hesitant to speak to police. That guard, Ron Wyrick, also testified. So he had been hired by Wackenhut to take photos during the strike, and Ron went on stand and he testified to Carl's blackmail. Ron said that Carl had invited him to his home for the party that night. Quote, I heard it was a party for Janet. I wasn't really sure what was going to happen. He testified to how he saw Janet tied to a bed, how he saw the guards assaulting Janet, and stated that Carl then directed him to start taking photos of everything that was happening. And he admitted that he did. Quote, Paiva wanted to make sure I had a picture of him and her together. He said after everything, he gave the 24 exposure roll of film to another guard who then allegedly gave it to Carl. He spoke about how that was why everyone had kept silent about that night because of the threat of the photos. Everyone knew Carl had them, and it is said to this day those photos have never been found. Now, when Cheryl had testified, she said that Ron here was one of the guards who had sexually assaulted Janet, but on the stand under oath, Ron denied that and said he only took photos. He denied having any sexual contact at all with Janet. Harry Keith also testified. He spoke about how he had arrived at the party with Glenn Johnson and how there were about 10 to 15 people mingling in the living room area when he arrived. He said he saw Carl there, of course, Freddie, Ron Wyrick, that Robbie Clunky guy, and Tony there. And he said there were other guards and at least 2 women there as well. He said he had been at Carl's home approximately 30 to 45 minutes before he ever saw Janet. So he had gone to the bathroom. All right. And on the way to the bathroom down the hall, he passed a bedroom and had its door partially cracked. He could make out that there was a body on the bed, but nothing else really clicked or stood by as he walked by. Remember, he was on his way to the bathroom. So he just kind of happened to glance over and was like, oh, there's a body on the bed. That's weird. Just kind of continued on to the bathroom. On his way back, he realized it was a female body on the bed. She was bound, had duct tape around her eyes, and someone was having intercourse with her. That's what he could tell on his way back from the bathroom. He said he couldn't really see inside because the door was partially cracked, and there were 2 guys standing outside the bedroom as if guarding it. He said that these guys would let certain people in and out of the bedroom, and yeah, it was like they were bouncers or something. He said there were other guards standing kind of around the bedroom, almost as if they were waiting to get in. He said to him, it looked from his observation that he could see that, like, certain people would be let in for longer times than others, and to him, it seemed very, like, organized. He said the people that would spend some time in the bedroom and then would be let out when they would come back to mingle with the party, they had that, like, musky, just had sex smell on them. He said he probably went back to the bathroom, like, 3 or 4 times during the night of the party, and he admitted he was aware that Janet was missing, but he said it didn't really click in his mind, like, any connection there, you know, that the female body he saw was Janet and what was happening to her and that she was missing. He said none of that really, like, clicked. He said on about his 3rd trip to the bathroom, he glanced over and he did see his roommate Robert in the bedroom. He was on top of the woman, straddling her, talking in her ear, and then choking her. He punched her as she wiggled to get away, and she was, like, screaming behind the duct tape, like, you know, it was like a muffled, you know, cry behind, like, some duct tape. He said at this point, Freddie was one of the men standing guard by the bedroom door. He talked about the end of the party, how people were scattering to put, like, their coats and stuff on, while he himself helped clean up some of the leftover garbage, you know, plates and cups and that kind of stuff. He noticed in one of the garbage bags he was handed to go throw out back was a woman's blouse and other clothes. And he testified he just didn't make any connection at that time. He didn't really understand what he had just been handed, you know. He said he did, as he was cleaning up, he did see Robert and someone else, like, prodding and poking and slapping the woman on the bed. Only now he noticed that the duct tape was off. He said he did not know at that time that Janet was dead, but when police later spoke to him, he said that's when it clicked, like, oh shit, like, that was Janet that I saw. He admitted on the stand to lying to police back in 1979, saying that he was sort of in denial, was stunned at what had happened, and was scared what would happen to him if he opened his mouth. And the defense, really the only thing they could do was attack all these testimonies, right? They tried pointing, I mentioned this earlier, right? They really tried pointing out the inconsistencies with people's statements. They really hammered on the fact that Cheryl on stand said that Ron was one of the guards who had sexually assaulted Janet, but Ron denied that on stand. They tried bringing stuff like this up, and that was pretty much all they had, right? Was just try to poke holes in everyone's testimonies. Another example was that Diane said that she thought the assault happened in the afternoon sometime, like around 3 p.m. She could have swore it was daylight, but, you know, everybody else had said that no, it was dark. They pointed to Cheryl's discrepancy where she lied to police and said her and Tony had broken up when they talked to her in 1979, but in actuality, she was still with him. One of the defense attorneys, Steve Fishman, said, quote, if in fact Cheryl Ruiz saw what she saw, do you believe for 1 minute she would have gone about her everyday life with Tony Williams? I'm not sure who Fishman was representing, but yeah, I don't know if I made that clear earlier. Carl, Freddie, Bubba, and Tony were all having the same trial. All 4 of them were being tried at the same time. Fishman even tried to assert that Cheryl and Diane weren't even at the party that night. And I guess he pointed to the fact that there were 5 other witnesses at the party who said they didn't recall seeing Cheryl or Diane. It's like, yeah, because everyone's going to know every single person at that party, right? And they also pointed to Diane's statement back in 1979 that she gave to police. She said she wasn't even at the party that night. She was at a tavern with Cheryl, Tony, and another man named Dan Martinez. There was yet another guard whose name we've mentioned a couple times, Willie Bass, who was subpoenaed to testify by the prosecution, but he invoked his Fifth Amendment rights and refused to testify. More testimony came from witnesses who weren't at the party, but knew the defendants afterwards. An acquaintance, possibly a friend of Bubba's, named Angela Baisden, lived near him in West Virginia in 1997, and she testified that one day he let it slip that he, quote, killed somebody in Michigan in the 1970s. She said he was watching her children that day, and one of her kids, her daughter, had suffered like a cut near her eye, and she told Bubba that she was worried about what to tell her husband. Quote, he said, don't worry about it. I killed somebody in Michigan in the 1970s. She said she thought at the time it was like just a really bad joke, but, you know, when she saw, you know, when he had been arrested, what he was accused of, that's when she called police just to let him know what she knew. Bubba's attorney, Joe Legatz, asserted that Angela was only testifying against Bubba because Bubba had convinced his girlfriend not to give Angela a loan or something like that. And on November 1st, after a day and a half of deliberations, Carl, Bubba, Freddie, and Tony were all found guilty. They were convicted on the felony murder charges, with Carl being convicted on first-degree murder charges charges, and the rest being convicted on the second-degree murder charges. They all face an automatic sentence of life without parole, and Attorney General Cox said of the verdicts, quote, "The case is about never giving up. Janet Chandler's tragic death happened long ago, and unfortunately the trail went cold." He said the new evidence discovered, quote, "breathed new life into the case. In the end, this incredible team of police and prosecutors has now closed the book on this horrific crime, and, quote, has brought closure for Janet's parents and family." David, remember David Schock, was ecstatic. Quote, "Praise God from whom all blessings flow. That's it right there. I think we have achieved justice. I am so grateful. It has been a long road. I am pleased. I think justice has been served. Our goal was to have Janet's day in court. We had it." And at this point, David no longer taught at Hope College. Janet's parents left the courtroom without addressing reporters, and it is said one of Freddie's family members actually, passed out when the guilty verdicts were handed down. And it was said that they actually required medical treatment due to the shock of him being found guilty. Lori was officially sentenced on November 19th, 2007. The prosecution had decided not to officially sentence her until after the men's trials. She was sentenced to 10 to 20 years behind bars, and at her sentencing, she apparently took full responsibility for her actions, asked for the Chandlers' forgiveness, and stated that there was no excuse for what she had partaken in that day. Quote, "I live in a self-imposed mental prison. This has affected every aspect of my life. Age, covenants, jealousy, they are no excuse." She talked about how the years went on, she feared more and more about coming forward, and wasn't so much about fearing for her life, but fearing about what the relationship with her family, her daughter, would be. Janet's parents thought that Lori's admission was encouraging, with Glenna saying, quote, "I think Lori has really taken the first step. She recognizes where the power comes from." Lori had said finding faith had, helped her cope. And Jim echoed the same sentiment. Quote, "I'm encouraged to hear Lori say she has taken responsibility for what she did and recognize there has to be a penalty." Glenna said she actually felt sorry for Lori's family. Quote, "We have had to deal with it for much of our lives, but for these people, it's only been 3 years." Lori's family had been in court, including Lori's sister, who hugged Glenna outside the courtroom. Lori would end up being released on parole sometime in 2016, and she was fully discharged from parole in 2018. She now resides somewhere in Pennsylvania, trying to live anonymously. All 4 men were officially sentenced on December 10th, 2007, and they were sentenced to, of course, automatic life without the possibility of parole, and not a single one of the scumbags had a single thing to say. The Chandlers weren't too surprised, though. Quote, "You'd have thought, well, what can they say? They all say they weren't there and they're innocent. As a Christian, I just say we should probably forgive. However, you have to ask for forgiveness, and none of these arrogant people showed remorse, much less ask for forgiveness." Cheryl and Diane spoke with Dateline in May of 2008 when they ran a story on this case. And when the reporter asked them why neither of them had come forward, had said anything, or done anything to protect Janet, quote, "I'd say probably fear. I never expected them to kill her. I didn't think she would die." The reporter asked if either of them looked at each other at any point in time that night and was like, "We have to stop this." They said they couldn't. Quote, "We couldn't. Yeah, all these men, and then it was just us two. There's no way. You just couldn't stop it." And when asked why they couldn't have called police, quote, "You could see what they were doing, and that was kind of a fear thing, right? We'd seen what they did to her. They're going to do it to us." And the 2 women kept in touch sporadically over the decades. And when asked why they didn't come forward after a few years, after the dust is clearly settled, they said that they feared no one would believe them. And when the reporter asked if either of them feel that they had a hand in victimizing Janet, Cheryl said no, not at all. She didn't feel she did anything wrong by keeping silent all these years. Diane said she did, though. And the reporter asked her, quote, "Do you feel shame about keeping quiet or having been there in the first place and not done anything?" And Diane said, quote, "Probably both, and not being able to do anything to help her." But both women say that people shouldn't judge them, though. Quote, "They didn't walk in our shoes. They don't know us. They don't know what we've been told. Yeah, that fear grips you." Swank said that he understands why the women didn't come forward. Quote, "When you're a 21-year-old young lady and you watch one of your friends, and I use that term loosely, being sexually assaulted and murdered, and then the guys that did it said to you, 'You talk, that's what you get,' what would you do?" But Detective Floor wasn't buying it. Quote, "I wouldn't let them off the hook at all. And you know why? Because everybody felt a level of guilt. Believing it was guilt that kept everyone silent for so long, not fear." Quote, she was kidnapped. It was staged. And they knew what was going to happen to her. She was going to be taught a lesson. So why are those people there? To watch that unfold. And did any of them try to warn Janet? Not a one of them. In September of 2008, the documentary Who Killed Janet Chandler won the the Audience Choice Award for the Best Feature Documentary at the Tri-Media Film Festival that's held in Fort Collins, Colorado. And on July 31st, 2009, the Michigan Court of Appeals rejected Carl, Bubba, Freddie, and Tony's appeal and reaffirmed their sentence. In January of 2010, the Chandlers filed a civil suit against the Wackenhut Security Company, which was based in Florida, accusing the company of negligent hiring and negligent supervision of their employees. In their suit, they stated that they had endured, mental pain and anguish, and alleged the company was at fault for not doing proper background checks and just not really following through and supervising their employees. They were seeking damages, but unfortunately that same year, U.S. District Judge Janet Neff tossed a suit out on a technicality, citing a Michigan state statute that says to recover damages of the death of a person, that charges had to be filed within 3 years of the incident. And the courts didn't seem to care that the Chandlers were like, but we didn't know who did it until all this went down. When asked if they regretted getting involved with the documentary and, finding out aspects of Janet's life, the Chandler said no. Quote, every newborn baby reminds us of our empty arms that she should have filled. These are things that time doesn't ever heal. And Jim added, quote, we've heard everything now that could possibly come out, and a lot I'm sure was false. People say you didn't have to do this, but yes, I did. These doors had to be open to get those who are guilty of this crime. Knowing Janet couldn't speak for herself was the hardest thing. And it seemed like, the Chandlers weren't believing all the sexual exploits that Janet was being accused of. They did not believe that Janet was sexually active and exploring. Jim said, quote, I guess what upsets me the most is the media takes every word these people say as fact. These people have lied for 27 years. How can people believe what they are saying? He described his daughter as a devout Christian and said that they knew who Janet was. But it wasn't just Janet's parents who were sort of having difficulty coping with this other side of Janet. Her friend since 9th grade, Lori Link, also didn't believe it. Quote, I was with her just a couple of weeks before she died, and I don't see her doing any of this stuff. And she thought maybe her friend being naive is what played a role in her death. Quote, I really think Janet was naive at how dangerous these people could be and that things could get out of control. She couldn't realize how evil these people were who called themselves her friends. She said the last time she had spoken with her friend, Janet was excited at the possibility of singing with some sort of opera company in New York. Quote, she had a future planned. She was really looking forward to moving on to that part of her life. And look, I get it. I see people online talking about this, oh yeah, her family doesn't want to accept, this, that, or the other. I don't know, but to me, I don't know, this whole fact about Janet's sexual life just doesn't really have any bearing on this case for me. She was brutalized and murdered. I don't give a flying fuck what her life was. I don't care if she was sexually active or not. Nobody deserves that, you know what I mean? And yeah, it's just kind of weird to see people debating this because some of her family will comment on articles saying that she wasn't like that. And then, you have investigators coming out and saying, well, in our investigation, this is what we discovered, yada yada. To me, it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. That's so besides the point. Janet was targeted and she was a victim and was brutalized in a way that no human deserves. On March 4th, 2013, Robert attempted to have the Michigan State Supreme Court hear his case, but they denied to listen to his case. And in late March of 2013, Carl died behind bars. He died from natural causes at the age of 61, with the official cause being respiratory failure. He was in the state prison hospital in Jackson when he died, having been sent there in January. And I'm not sure, for what. Some kind of medical treatment. Not sure what. Jim said that he and Glenna had been notified of Carl's death, and he said, quote, I have no sympathy for him. For his children, it's horrible, of course. And he said he didn't spend too much time thinking about Janet's killers. Quote, they're never getting out. And I guess at some point, Lori's mother had written a letter to Glenna apologizing for her daughter's actions. And tragically, in 2015, James Chandler Jr., Janet's older brother, passed away from natural causes, is all that I could find. And on June 8th, 2020, Bubba died behind bars, but officials did not release his official cause of death. All they stated was that he did not die of COVID. So 2 of the fuckers are dead and gone, and we've got 3 more to go. And that, boys and girls, was the awful, horrific, brutal case of Janet Chandler. And I just... what do you do with these people? Like, no, I'm sorry. Every single person at that party, Harry Keith, Patty Ward, Glenn Johnson, all of these assholes, as far as I'm concerned, have a hand in this. I don't understand how you know what went down that night, even after the fact, and you still keep your fucking mouth shut. Like, that's disgusting and horrendous to me. Like, I don't even understand how you don't say anything years later. You couldn't even write an anonymous letter to the police, you know, like through the 80s. They wouldn't have been able to track you down. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm not being fair, but everyone who was at that party, if they did not know what was happening to Janet that night as they were at that party, they obviously put two and two together when police interviewed them, right, back in the 70s. And how not a single one of you assholes said anything. And to top it all off, not only did these people not go to police, they waited for police to come to them and then lied to them. Police had to keep hammering everybody until they finally spoke. No, I'm sorry. All these people are garbage. You're all garbage human beings. You're sick and twisted and disgusting. And if any of these assholes was related to me, I would absolutely be cutting them off. Yeah, that includes the witnesses. Like, no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, dude. Like, fuck you and your threats. I don't care. An anonymous letter, something, to at least drop names so law enforcement can start gathering up those crumbs. But no, not a single one of these fucking assholes said a damn thing. And I'm sorry, I feel like you don't get credit for that. Robert, you don't get credit. Robert does not get credit for jack shit. Police had to keep hammering him before he finally spoke. And yeah, okay, I guess a little bit of credit for not going to trial and not making the Chandlers go through that. Like, whoop-de-doo, I guess. Like, you get credit for that and admitting it. But still, like, this asshole lived a whole life. All of these assholes got to live their lives. They got to have Christmases, Thanksgivings, 4th of Julys, barbecues, summer vacations, family time. Like, they got to have all of these experiences that Janet did not. That the Chandlers didn't get with Janet. They got to have kids and grandkids. The Chandlers didn't get any of that with Janet. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too harsh, but like, I don't think any of these people deserve any credit at all. All of these people involved in this case are scumbags. All scum. I don't care if you didn't actually sexually assault Janet. Like, you knew what went on at that party after the police interviewed you. You knew, and you still lied. Ugh. I'm sorry. Like, I just had to go on that tangent because, like, I'm sorry. I don't think Lori gets any credit. I don't think Robert gets any credit. I don't think any of the witnesses who testified at the trials get any credit. Nah. Y'all scum. You're scum is what you are. Because I guarantee you, if someone did something even half as awful to any of their loved ones, they would be quite incensed if no one came forward. Hey, Lori, what if someone did that to your daughter? Would you be incensed if people shut their mouths for nearly 30 years? I don't know. Fuck all these people. They're all scum. At least Bubba and Carl are dead. Rotten pieces, you pieces of shit. I'm sorry. This case incensed me. Like, there was a reason why I kept putting it off, because it's intense. The shit that people were describing. And then the fact that these scumbags were bragging about it. I don't know. And like I said, I really don't care about Janet's sexuality. Whether she was promiscuous or not, I don't give a flying fuck. I think that is besides the point. I don't care. Like, no one deserves to go through what Janet went through. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I don't know. Thank you so much to Harm Reduction Saves Lives for making me aware of this case. It is certainly an intense one, and it's just... That's another thing. It's just, Janet was hated because she was doing what everyone else was doing. So, like, let's say that this is real. Like, Janet was, exploring sexually or whatever. Nothing wrong with that. But so was everybody else. Carl was banging like 2 or 3 chicks at a time, and he has the nerve to get mad at Janet for sleeping around? Get the fuck out of here, dude. You misogynistic prick. Fuck you. I don't know. These people, dude, I don't understand. Like, ganging up on her, bullying her, when she was doing what everybody else was doing. I don't know, dude. Make it make sense, guys. Make it make sense. Oh, man. So I hope, go in and digest something more happy after this, all right? This case is intense. It's a lot. The more I think about it, the more just, like, yeah, angry and disgusted I am. Fuck all these people. Well, I guess I will let you go. This was a long one. There's a lot to get into. And yeah, it's probably going to stay with you for a while. I don't think I'll ever forget this case. We'll be back on October 3rd with another case. We're in October, the spoopy season. I'll have my set all done up. Knowing that I was going to record this case and having to go over like my notes and all this stuff, I don't know, it just didn't really put me in a festive mood. I didn't really feel like gussing up my set. But next week when we come back, I'll have all the Halloween stuff up. This case was just a lot. Poor Janet. Poor Janet. Ugh. It just breaks my heart. Well, I'll go ahead and let you guys go until we meet again in 2 weeks. Take care out there, stay safe and happy and healthy and all that good stuff. And remember, man, when you're out there in the world, don't be a dick. Don't be human scumbag trash like these human beings that we talked about, all right? Leave a little sparkle wherever you go. And for the love of God, if you witness a crime, no matter what, please let the police know about it. Don't stay silent. Alrighty, guys. Enjoy your 2 weeks. I will see you next month. Bye-bye.